I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to your Innovation, Grants, Technology, Commerce, and Trade Committee. I always give a dollar out in the world to anybody who can remember those all those acronyms or what the acronym stands for. So I'm joined by my colleagues Krikorian and Bonin. We expect Mr. Buscaino shortly. What I'd like to do, although I was going to take a few items on consent, but I'll wait till Mr. Buscaino is here. And in fact, I was going to start with the port issues, but because Mr. Buscaino is not here yet, why don't we?
Oh, here he is.
Oh, here he is. All right. We're going to go. Joe, I was going to hold the port items for you, but we're going to go straight into them. No problem. So, unless as far as consent items go, unless there's an objection from my colleagues, I'd like to move items 3 through 7. And items 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 on consent. Colleagues, is there any objection to those items being moved on consent?
None.
Seeing no objection, that will be the order. And that will then take us to item, I assume there are no public comment cards on any of those items?
We did have one public comment card. However, I believe that was on item number
9.
Yes.
Yeah, we do have a public comment card on item 9, which we will get to in due course. So then that leaves us to, starting with item number 1, we'll take care of the 2 port issues, just a general framework, take care of the 2 port issues. Then we'll move to the airport issues. We'll deal with the security issue first because I know our public safety folks are on a little bit of a time restriction, and then we'll move to the other LAWA issues after that. So starting with the items 1, actually what I'd like to do is take up item 1 and 2 together. They're related, and the questions can be interrelated, and that'll save us some time. We'll vote on them separately, but we'll hear them together. Mr. Espinosa, would you read those 2 items into the record?
Great. Item number 1 is a verbal report from the Los Angeles Harbor Department relative to the San Pedro Bay Port's Clean Air Action Plan of 2017. Item number 2 is the Board of Harbor Commissioners report and ordinance relative to amending Port of Los Angeles Tariff number 4. Section 20, item number 2060, Clean Air Action Plan, General Rules and Regulations, Environmental Ship Index.
We'll invite Mr. Chris Cannon from POLA to the table, and anyone else who's here for the presentation. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good afternoon. Sorry.
You're right, afternoon. Feels like the morning.
Thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'll try to be efficient as I go through these slides and just give you an overview of what we're doing with the Clean Air Action Plan. And then we have the Environmental Ship Index matter. So to start with the Clean Air Action Plan, we on November 17th of this year, just last month, we released a draft discussion document of the latest update for the Clean Air Action Plan. I want to emphasize to you all that it's a draft discussion document. Its purpose is to stimulate a dialogue on these issues, and so some of the issues are deliberately sort of set up to kind of stimulate that discussion, and so we hope to hear from them. We're going to take comments through February 17th, although we've already been asked to extend that, given that part of that includes the holidays, so it looks more and more likely that that's going to happen. But certainly want to let you know that we're going to do everything we can to meet with everybody, and I want to point out that the meetings that we're having, I had a meeting literally the morning after, was the 18th at 8 o'clock in the morning was my first stakeholder meeting. We met with the California Trucking Association, and we're going to try to have more than one meeting with each stakeholder. The idea being we don't want them to feel like we just met with them and said thanks very much, goodbye. We actually want to meet and then get back to them and kind of give them a report on where we're going and what we're doing. We're also planning 2 public workshops. The first is going to be at Banning's Landing sometime either the 10th, 11th, or 12th of January. And then we're going to have a second one. And we're going to have board members at each one from both ports. And the idea, again, will be to talk about what we're doing and then come back and report on what we've seen and how things are moving. So with that, let me move through this. As you know, 10 years ago, we had our first Clean Air Action Plan. It was the result of movement by community and regulatory agencies to encourage the port to develop standards for for port-related emissions. It was ships, trains, trucks, cargo handling equipment, and Harborcraft. And so the port actually set standards for these emissions, and we developed programs, some of which you've certainly heard of, things like the Clean Truck Program, which resulted in a reduction of emissions from port drayage trucks, a vessel speed reduction for ships. We pioneered the plugging in of shore power, which is something that we're also very proud of. We work with cargo handling equipment. We've done a lot of testing of new technologies for cargo handling equipment and have resulted in dramatic reductions in those as well. We developed the first hybrid tugboat, which is first in the world and reduces emissions from tugs as they move in and out of the port, as well as other cranes and other types of cargo handling equipment. And certainly we've worked with the shipping lines and the cruise ships and others to do things. Our locomotive switching fleet is the cleanest, we believe, in the world, working with Pacific Harbor Lines. So we believe that this Clean Air Action Plan is a perfect example of how a public-private partnership can work. We sat down with all the stakeholders, industry, community, government, and others, and engaged in a planning process where everybody kind of agreed that this is the way to go and that reducing emissions at the port was not only good for the environment but good for business. And so we're proud that nearly all of our Clean Air Action programs are actually now either state, federal, or international law. And so we were the lead in a lot of these programs, but they then were picked up by regulators and turned into rules and regulations. We believe that that's the best way that government regulation should occur. It starts out with a consensus among industry, and then voluntary implementation, and then leading to regulation that essentially confirms that consensus. And we think that that is an effective model, and we believe that in order to do the things that we need to do in the coming years, we have to have that same kind of structure. So the result, of course, has been a lot of success. You've seen these numbers before. This is our 2015 air emissions inventory. You can see the dramatic reductions, particularly with sulfur oxides there, 97%. That's due to the change in fuel requirements. The sulfur content in fuels has gone way down, and that's a good example of where we actually started that as part of the Clean Air Action Plan. It's now international law. There's an emissions control area that goes out for 200 miles. It was just enacted in federal law. Nitrogen oxides, diesel particulate matter, which is a surrogate for health risk. So roughly, if you see about an 84 or 85% reduction in health risk, in diesel particulate matter, you would have about the same amount reduction in health risk. So we're very proud. All this has occurred while our TEUs have gone up 7%. So it's not just because volumes went down, it's actually because we've had a lot of success. We're only down 12% greenhouse gases. I won't get into the details. We were up around 16, 17%, but then we had a little bit of cargo slowdown. There was some congestion that occurred over late 14 and early 15. I think you know some of the details associated with that, but that caused a lot of increased fuel use as ships were anchored in the harbor, and as a result, our greenhouse gas numbers went down. We expect them to go back up for our 2016 inventory somewhere in the 17 to 18% level. So these are just giving you, this gives you the goals that we set for ourselves for 2014. You can see we've exceeded all of them in all of our areas of the pollutants. And these are the goals for 2023. You can see that we're ahead 2 out of the 3. The big challenge is the oxides of nitrogen, and this is something Joe has been pushing as a member of the AQMD. That's a big issue for them, and we look forward to working with AQMD to address NOx issues. So what I want to do is briefly go through the updates, the things that we're planning to do.
Just a quick question on the percentages.
Yes.
What are those baselined against?
I'm sorry. It's compared to our 2005 emissions. So the baseline was 2005. That was the first year we did the analysis.
And so the percentages, is that amount down
From 2005.
in absolute value, despite the fact that the amount of movement and goods movement has gone up in that time?
That's correct. Goods movement cargo has gone up, but since our 2005 emissions inventory, and this would be 10 years later, these emissions have gone down.
Right. But do you factor in the amount of, TEUs or any of that as traffic? Does that change the numbers at all?
It does, and I was alluding to that a little bit. You see there on the left, lower left there, the TEUs, the traffic has actually gone up, and so. But actually, even more than that, when we do the calculations, we look at emissions per TEU to try and look at it in an efficient way.
That's what I'm getting at.
And those emissions per TEU have gone down, and that's not only just because of the programs that I described, I briefly alluded to. We're also getting bigger ships, which is much more efficient. Just by having 14,000 TEU ship versus a 7,000 TEU ship, the amount of emissions per box on that ship goes down.
Would the per TEU numbers be even better than this, or would they appear?
Yeah, not better than the big percentages, but the emissions per TEU are certainly going down. You see a downward trend. I don't have the numbers handy.
But how would they, when you look at nitrous oxide down 50%, if you were to guess, nitrous oxide per TEU, would that be down as much as 50%?
Almost. Because of this, it's the same, as you can see, with a 7% up, which is not that big of an increase. So with the dramatic emissions, yes, the emissions per TEU are roughly that, but they're not quite the same.
Thanks.
So the new update, our 2017 Clean Air Action Plan update, its purpose is to support regional planning and state planning by the Air Resources Board. They're doing something called a Sustainable Freight Action Plan. That's something that they have been working on over the last year to year and a half. The AQMD is also working on an AQMP, Air Quality Management Plan, and it too is something that we hope this will support. Our goal is that these plans are kind of broad and necessarily they set broad goals because of the fact that they have to deal with the whole state. So we believe that our update can be an example of exactly how the Clean Air Action Plan, how these emissions programs can be implemented specifically in the San Pedro Bay. So it's kind of like a local implementation plan, we believe, for statewide and regional planning. One thing that is important, our city of Los Angeles, as you know, has set some new goals for greenhouse gas. Our mayor has been very aggressive. Members of the city council have also been very aggressive in their comments about greenhouse gas. I personally believe it's the biggest environmental crisis facing the world today. And so I'm very happy to point out that we've added a long-term greenhouse gas goal. We've tied ourselves to the AB 32 2050 goal of 80% reduction below 1990 levels. Sounds like a long way away, but to get from that 12% I showed you to 80% is a big, big jump. And so that planning has to occur now. We also, our mayor has set, as you know, goals for 2025 and interim years beyond that. And so we're going to have to work very hard. The 2025 goal is 45% below 1990 levels. So we've got our work cut out for us. And each of the two cities, Long Beach and LA, have got different interim goals, but our certain plan at Port of Los Angeles will be to work with the mayor's goal. We have strategies on clean vehicles, equipment technologies, as you can see, infrastructure, efficiency, and resource planning. I want to emphasize the infrastructure investment piece. We did some initial planning as we have to move towards zero emissions being our ultimate goal, and frankly, the only way we can get to those greenhouse gas goals is to increase electrification at the port. We found out that the cost of infrastructure for transition to zero emissions is almost the same as the cost of the equipment itself. So whatever it costs to buy a zero emission truck, you end up spending just about that much to set it up with infrastructure for plugging in and moving the electricity into the area. So it's extraordinarily expensive. We need to work with you all as well as us regional and state officials on identifying priorities for funding and also for infrastructure planning. So I want to really emphasize the importance of that. Finally, the last one there is important as well, energy resource planning. If we're going to increase electrification, then that means we're going to have to get more electricity and improve the grid. The grid here in Los Angeles is a 1950s vintage, and so it's been around for a while, and in some ways it's not as efficient as it needs to be. And so we need to make sure that the amount of power available for the port, and in our case, our power usage could triple within the next 10 to 15 years. The amount of power available for the port has got to be significant. We have to have power delivery that's resilient and can withstand natural or unnatural disasters. And it also has to be green power, because if we move toward electricity and we still generate the power in a way that's not green, we're not helping. So those are our broad goals. The first one is the one that most people are interested in is the Clean Air Action Plan Clean Truck Program. As you can see there, the last bullet is probably the key one. By 2035, we propose that all drayage trucks operating at the port will have to be zero emissions. We would begin that as a transition, and beginning in early 2018, all trucks with engines 10 years or older will have to have a fee charged on the cargo that they carry, very similar to the way we did it the last Clean Truck Program. And then there would be exceptions, of course, for near zero and zero emissions trucks. And then that fee will continue each year. So in 2019, it's 10 years. It's 2020, it's 10 years. And it would continue all the way up to 2035. Beginning in 2020, we would ban, even if they try to pay a fee, they still won't be able to come in, any trucks that are pre-2010 emission standard trucks. We believe that will result in an drayage truck emissions a decrease of somewhere in about 50 to 60%. And right away. And we think actually the fees will amount to a ban, but certainly by 2020 that ban will kick into place. And then in 2023 we do something we call a soft ban, and that is to say any new trucks that are registered in the drayage truck registry will have to be ultra-low emission trucks or better. The reason we picked 2023 is because that's when CARB is going to require that those trucks have to be manufactured. So we tried to match ourselves with that. For terminal equipment, once again, the key there is the first bullet. The transition is to zero emissions by 2030. We believe that that's doable, but we're going to have to start doing procurement planning with our terminals as early as 2020. We don't want to have stranded assets. We don't want to have equipment that people buy in 2025 or 2028 and then say, I'm sorry, I can't replace it with zero emissions because I just bought it. So we're going to start doing planning with them as early as really now, but by 2020 we'd like to have plans in place for that. We're going to establish a terminal equipment idling reduction program. Sounds small, but actually when we look at our emissions inventory, the amount of emissions impacts from idling is not insignificant. And so there's idling requirements for on-road trucks. We'd like to develop them with the terminals as well. That certainly is going to be we're going to have to work with the unions and so forth. And finally, charging standards. This is something that applies not only just for the terminals but also for on-road trucks. It sounds simple, but every single manufacturer now that makes a zero-emission piece of equipment has its own plug. So we have to make all the plugs the same. And that can't be hard, right? It actually took us many, many years to do it with AMP. We plugged in the ships, and so doing it with this kind of equipment, we believe, will also take a few years. So we're beginning those standards, those planning now. For ocean-going vessels, we're going to expand our vessel speed reduction compliance to 40 nautical miles. We have pretty good voluntary compliance now. We have a little bit of an incentive program where they get a little bit of money. So almost everybody does it out to 20. We've got 85% or so out to 40 nautical miles. We want to encourage, get that up to over 95%. So we're going to change the incentives, and some of that will, in the environmental ship index that you hear next will be a part of that. But we want to change the incentives to make sure we do that. We also want to use at-berth emission reduction technologies. There's two hood technology companies that are out there right now. We want to encourage the increased use of that equipment for non-container ships as well as the container ships that can't plug in. So we believe that that's important, and that's another area where we think incentives in order to encourage the use of that equipment will be important. Energy efficiency upgrades and clean technologies. We are going to work closely with the shipping lines to help them develop technologies. I'll give you an example of one that we hear that's emerging. You may have heard recently that the IMO enacted or required now a global emissions fuel cap for the amount of sulfur that's in fuels. They have to go down to 0.5% sulfur, and that's down from 3.5, so it's a pretty big drop. It's an increase in cost, and many of the shipping lines are thinking of using scrubbers to address these. So if you put a scrubber on a ship in order to address sulfur emissions, now that you've got that infrastructure in place, it becomes easier to add other bells and whistles, such as NOx control, which is something that's very important. So we begin to work with them, and as well as energy efficiency and other kinds of programs. And then this last one here, a clean ship program to transition the oldest, most polluting ships out of the fleet. If you read the discussion document, you saw that that's possibly, likely another fee. We're going to have to work very hard with the shipping lines. The shipping industry is in very, very dire straits these days. As you know, there was one that recently just left the industry altogether, just in the last couple of months. But we believe in the same way that a fee or an increased rate of some sort works with the cargo for the trucks, we believe the same can work with the ships. And the goal there is to get, and this is a theme throughout the Clean Air Action Plan, oldest equipment has the highest amount of emissions. That's true with cargo handling equipment, that's true with the trucks, that's true with the ships. And so if we can get that old equipment out, in this case it's engine types that are required. They're called Tier 0 and Tier 1 engines, which are the oldest engines. We can get those out of the fleet that arrives and services the Port of Los Angeles. We think we can have dramatic improvements in emissions. Harborcraft, these are, as I said, we worked on the hybrid tugboat that I talked about. This also includes the workboats that go back and forth and service ships that are at anchor. We believe that the best opportunities here are to find incentives and even grant money to replace all of this equipment with the cleanest engines that are available. A lot of these are, again, old engines, these tugboats. They work very well, but if we can replace the engines on these Harborcraft, we can make a difference. And if you think that it isn't much, it was actually the Harborcraft that and the workboats that had one of the biggest impacts on emissions on NOx when we had the congestion, the slowdown, because when they're sitting at anchor, you have to have a lot of positioning and a lot of workboats going back and forth servicing the crews while they're sitting at anchor, and so the emissions in those Harborcraft shot way up, especially the NOx emissions. On dock rail, we're working with the railroads. We've got, I actually have a meeting with them tomorrow morning, and our first goal with on-dock rail is to increase its usage. Right now, the ports are in the 25 to 35% range of the percent of cargo that actually goes on dock. We believe that can go up to as high as 50%. And the way to increase that is to improve efficiencies, to use things like shuttle trains to move cargo in and out of terminals and to other sorting areas, and also just improve the efficiencies of the way that the ports work. We had a good meeting with the PMSA, the Merchant Shipping Organization, and they had some suggestions as well about how the trains operate on the terminals and ways in which they think that the operating rules for the trains could be improved. So we're going to be talking to them about that tomorrow. But as far as we're concerned, the rail is critically important, and our working with them is also important. I think you may have seen. That we have a new program we're working with the AQMD, Joe, on which is to test a new locomotive engine that is actually the cleanest now that's out there. It's 90% lower than a Tier 4 locomotive in terms of its emissions, and that's working with your staff there. So something that we're excited about, and this is more the kind of thing that we hope to do moving forward. Freight efficiencies, a green terminal program. This is something that we've begun to talk to terminals about. It's something like LEEDs. You've heard of LEED certified buildings. We would like to do something like that with terminals where they could actually receive recognition for having green operations and green equipment. And so we'd like to do that. And then study strategies to enhance system-wide efficiencies. We have a supply chain optimization group that is working on all the different links in the goods movement supply chain. And I can just give you an example of something that I think is it needs to be addressed. There are terminals where each box or piece of cargo is handled 8 times after it's unloaded from the ship and before it's moved out. So that's 8 times it's basically just shuffled around before it actually leaves. That's extraordinarily inefficient. It uses fuel, it costs money, and it generates emissions. And so these are all things that we can do to reduce emissions, and the impacts there, the benefits there, are not insignificant. And finally, I mentioned really this one. I just wanted to mention it again. The design criteria and infrastructure planning, as I said, as we transition to zero emissions, we're going to have to work on this. This is not just electricity. It's also for alternative fuels and for things like the green terminal operations, appointment systems, and things like that will require infrastructure planning as well. So this is all part of our program that we hope to accomplish. We believe that our program, if we implement it, will result in the same magnitude of emissions reductions that have occurred in the last 10 years, and certainly, if not more. To address the greenhouse gas goals and so forth, we're going to have to go from somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 17% greenhouse gas, below greenhouse gas levels, all the way up to 45% in 10 years. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to have to do it. So the increases and the improvements are going to have to be pretty dramatic. So I went very fast. We spent almost 40 minutes doing this presentation when we presented to the board, so apologies for that, but I just wanted to get through it. I know that you have a busy agenda today. As I said, we have a community meeting in January. The discussion document is available on our port website as well as the Clean Air Action Plan website, and comments can be provided at that location.
Great. Well, we appreciate you trying to go as quick as you can, and we appreciate all the good work that's behind it, and really the focus and attention on trying to reduce emissions is really important. A couple of quick questions, and I'll turn to my colleagues as well. Penalties for not reaching the emissions targets. Are there penalties, or how does that work?
Mean of our own penalties? No, we don't penalize ourselves, but when if we don't meet emissions targets, then we will have to sit down on a planning effort, and that will include the agencies, most notably the AQMD, and we're going to have to come up with alternative plans. And so we haven't penalized ourselves. On the other hand, we are working with the terminals for mitigation measures, and you've heard Gene talk about this, right, where we're going to have a program in there where if mitigation measures are not met, that there's actually going to be penalties or some sort of enforcement mechanism beyond just a letter, something that hits in the pocketbook that would somehow affect that. But those are for the mitigation measures. As far as the overall programs, which are a lot of which are voluntary, we just need to find new ways to make them happen. And we've been able to be successful. We think we will continue to be successful. But if something doesn't work, we're going to have to roll up our sleeves, probably be talking to you. We hope we're never talking to you about something like that, but we would have to talk to you, and most notably to Joe. He's going to I'm sure he would be extremely anxious to make sure that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Now, the plan includes both the Port of LA and Long Beach, right?
I say that again, I'm sorry.
The plan includes both Long Beach and Los Angeles.
For this document, yes, but I wanted to actually, I'm not sure where you're going yet, but I want to take this opportunity to say this, that the programs that I've identified are programs that the two ports will work on together. But it doesn't mean that the two cities and each individual port couldn't go on and do additional programs that go beyond what's been said in the Clean Air Action Plan. And I think in some cases we're going to have to do that. As I mentioned, the mayor's greenhouse gas target is pretty aggressive. And so there are going to be some programs that we enact ourselves at the city, Port of Los Angeles, and citywide level. And so in that case, the planning starts out as joint, but then there's additional separate planning that occurs as well.
Right, and we can monitor as it goes through. If we don't think Long Beach is doing enough or vice versa, we can pull that information out.
Yes. The emissions inventories that I showed you, we do our own separate emissions inventory so we can track our progress. So our progress isn't necessarily tied to them. Certainly our programs and our success has been joint and because we've worked well together. But we'll be able to track our own programs and our own success at the Port of Los Angeles in order to determine if we do separate things, how they work.
In terms of the environmental ship index program, what % of the vessels at the port are actually participating in that incentive?
4,800 ships are currently enrolled. That's worldwide. I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me get it. 359 ships at Port of Los Angeles.
What is that roughly? I mean, as a percentage, is that?
You got me.
Okay.
He's an environmental guy.
Yeah. Well, I mean. So, I mean, we want to encourage, I'm assuming we have room to grow on that too.
We do.
It sounds like a big number, but I think the overall number is much bigger. So.
Oh, we're in the thousands. And so we're only at about, I would guess, 30 to 40%. We can grow. We've had good success with that program, but we're not there yet. It's been a very successful program. We're the first port in North America to do it. It's been very popular in Europe. That's where it really began. And so getting ships that go in the Pacific, the Asia trade to enroll in environmental ship index, it's gradually increased, but it isn't as much as the ones in Europe. And so that's why you don't see you see the lower numbers. But 30 to 40% we think is very good, and we think that the concept is excellent. And ships have then more and more taken advantage of the incentives.
And where does the money for that program come from?
Harbor Department revenues.
So it's just straight out?
Yes, sir. Unfortunately.
Yeah,
But,
no,
yeah.
I mean, there's obviously a cost-benefit analysis that you guys have to do every time. In terms
It
of
is. I think so far the costs the benefits have more than outweighed the costs. And you know, my budget this next year for the environmental ship index is about $2 million, so it's not insignificant at all.
Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for scheduling this item before us. You often hear me share the story, colleagues, on growing up in the port, growing up on Alma Street, and I know Pat Gannon's here. He too grew up on Alma Street. The time where we saw DPM spewing from container ships, from trucks, and from the cranes as well. Stories of how our loved ones and kids growing up with asthma and higher cancer risks in and around the impacted communities of Wilmington and San Pedro. We've come a long way, truly come a long way. This port ought to be commended rather, for the work that you all have done in reducing emissions and creating a healthier environment. But we need to do more, as we often say. We are the largest seaport in the country, working with the Port of Long Beach. I still believe, even though we are the largest port, we're the cleanest port. We have grown. We're growing into
the cleanest port, notwithstanding the marketing of other people. We absolutely are the cleanest port.
And we need to celebrate that and share that with our stakeholders. Colleagues, I chair the Marine Ports Committee at the AQMD. We heard Chris's presentation last week with my colleagues on the AQMD. These environmental issues impacting the ports cannot be treated in a vacuum, and these ripple effects on the updated plan will hugely impact not only us locally, but this entire region. I wish you would have brought that backstop slide, which shows the AQMD attainments that you've attained. I mean, you're supposed to meet some marks by 2023. You've already hit those marks as well. I don't know if you can pull that up, but it clearly shows. I didn't see it in your presentation.
I don't have an AQMD number, but I do have the percent numbers that we've met. Hold on. These numbers right there.
Yeah, you know, to avoid the backstop, you showed clearly.
Oh, that's a different one. That's from your staff. Did
Yeah.
that one. It was a very good slide. It was. That's one from your staff.
I'm sorry,
I'll have
from
to get-
AQMD.
That was your staff,
Right.
yeah.
But you clearly have hit some goals and some marks already by 2023.
Yes.
But, you know, we've also heard from our communities, specifically the EJ community, as far as hitting those marks but doing it quicker. What's your response to that?
We're going to go as fast as we can. We have to strike a balance. The biggest benefits occur from encouraging, as I say, the older equipment to move out of the ports. We are not a regulator, and so we can't set a regulation per se banning. We do ban, but we have to do so very carefully because we really don't have the state or federal authority or international authority to do that. So our goal is to go as fast as we can. We've actually already begun to have discussions with the community and even your staff at AQMD to try to find ways to move things quicker. We want to do it. That's our goal. What you're seeing is us try to strike a balance between what our lawyers are screaming at us in our ear on the one hand and those who want us to continue to push harder on the other hand. So my response, Joe, is yes, we know we're going to do the best we can, and if we can go a little faster even than what we proposed, we'll find a way to do it.
And we often talk about the best available technology before us today. I would encourage the port to use that bonnet system. It's so versatile where you can even now use it in trains. Why hasn't the port identified that bonnet system as far as, because some of these ships, as the chairman indicated, some are not even amped ready, but that's having that bonnet system, the barge. I would like to see more of a commitment from the port on using the bonnet system moving forward. Can you explain that?
We are committed. We were the first ones to help develop it, and there are two companies that did this, and we funded both of them, or at least indirectly. The Clean Air Engineering one that is work with TRAPAC, and directly the Amex we actually gave as a TAP program. We've done what we can to improve the opportunities for those bonnet systems to work. My goal, and you'll probably be seeing me in the coming months come back when I have some modifications to the environmental ship index, I'd like to create it so that ships can receive credit for using the bonnet system, so that if they don't plug in, they actually get a financial incentive just to use the bonnet system. And that's something that we're working on as staff privately. I haven't brought it before our board yet, but when it comes, it'll be here, and I'll be happy to remind you of that this discussion, because we believe it's important. We're also testing. We'll be the first people to test at the Pasha terminal the bonnet system's use for bulk ship, break bulk they call it. And so it's the first time that it'll ever be tested in that kind of a setting, and we hope that through that testing we'll get CARB certification for that, in which case it'll be required in those settings as well.
Fantastic. And then lastly, if I can, just I've heard your outreach plan. I also I understand that you've already met with some key stakeholders. What's the type of kind of input you're getting in return from meeting with some of our stakeholders?
You mean the comments we're receiving? All over the map. The environmental groups have said what you said, go faster. AQMD staff has said, go faster. The trucking industry is angry about fees and bans because they believe that it'll hurt small business, and they want us to do something to make sure that if trucks are subject to fees or bans, that there's money available for replacing trucks or retraining drivers to get other opportunities. We've heard from the shipping lines who tell us to be careful about placing fees on ships because they think that fees on ships is going to be anti-competitive, especially in this tight market. They also had a lot of comments on how to make the terminals operate more efficiently. As I mentioned, they had some comments on some things for rail operations as well as other kinds of terminal efficiency operations. We're working with the ILWU actually on an efficiency test that they're proposing with one of our terminals, and we're actually going to test the benefits of adding what they call the hoot shift, as you know how that's the night shift. So we're actually working with them on something like that. Haven't met with the railroads yet. That's tomorrow morning. But really the comments have been all over the place. On the one hand, people think we're crazy. On the other hand, people think we need to go faster and we need to do more. So, but I think that what I mentioned is a good sort of example
Yeah,
of something
appreciate the
coming.
presentation. The numbers don't lie. And I have friends and family who work the docks who can clearly testify that it's a lot cleaner environment today than it was 15, 20 years ago. So appreciate the commitment that's made by the port. And as a governing board member of the AQMD, looking forward to continuing to work with you and in a collaborative way. But at the same time, holding everyone accountable to ensure we meet our goals. And I know we have the Lawat family here today from the airport. I strongly encourage in preparation for the AQMP that we should put our heads together and gear up for the AQMP that the board, the AQMD board, will be hearing in now February or so. So thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Council Member.
Questions? Mr. Bono.
Not a question. Just wanted to chime in and echo what Mr. Buscaino said. This is pretty impressive. This is really one of the most significant environmental things that the city of Los Angeles has done, ever. And it's a story that isn't recognized enough and told enough, and it's something we should be shouting from the rooftops. It's really pretty profound. And as Mr. Buscaino knows, my in-laws are all from San Pedro, and my husband grew up suffering from asthma decades ago because of what was going on.
I know that story, actually. I know your
Yes.
husband, yes.
Most of my in-laws work or have worked the docks, and it is a profoundly noticeable experience, they will all tell you. And in pretty short period of time. I mean, it's been really big change in a short period of time, and just kudos to you and to Mr. Buscaino and everybody who's been involved in making this happen.
Thank you, Council Member.
Corey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, first, I want to echo my colleagues' praise, both on the substance of this and on the report, which is excellent. So thank you.
Thank you.
Quick question, though, on renewable energy use. You had mentioned earlier the increasing demand and the impact that's going to have on the power grid and the need to upgrade the grid. How much, first of all, what does your demand curve look like through the day? Is it, I mean, are you primarily a peak user, or, I mean, give me kind of a general sense of.
Yes, it is about what you would expect. It's highest during the day. There is a little bit of a peak. We have a night shift that occurs, but for the most part, it jumps up at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and then most of the shifts start right around then, and then it carries on through till about 6, and then it starts to tail off around 7
so
or 8.
you're an ideal solar customer then.
Yes.
So how much generation are you doing on site for that? How much solar?
No generation. I mean, solar? We're at about 3 megawatts right now. We've got plans in place to get up to about 13. We've just approved a program where we will add a bunch of new solar generation. So we'll be up to 13. And then, of course, you know about the Pasha project, that's part of that. That's about 2.5 megawatts there from the Pasha project. So we're aiming for somewhere in the 13 to 15 megawatt range over the next 3 to 5 years.
Generated on site.
Generated on site.
Great. And is there any cross distribution between Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach, or the distribution system's entirely distinct?
Completely different. We're DWP. They're SoCal Edison.
Right. But, okay. And then lastly, on this issue of cost that we've raised, given the fact that these air quality improvements are localized, but they're the result of the fact that so much of America's freight comes through this port, that the health risks that Mr. Buscaino's constituents face are because of America's freight.
Yes.
Are we not getting federal support and investment for this sort of air quality improvement work that you're doing? I mean, how much of that is grant funded or otherwise supported by the federal government?
We've been fortunate to get grant money. The EPA has been very supportive of our programs. So has the Air Resources Board, as well as the California Energy Commission. So I would say it's good. The big thing that you'll hear our commissioners talk about is the harbor improvement tax, the fact that we don't get any of that money back. We're the largest port, so we pay the most out.
Right.
But the amount of money that comes back in to help
Other
us with
ports
programs
grow.
is extremely low. So I'm sure if they were sitting next to me, I'd be getting an elbow right now, having them remind you all of that, although Joe is well aware of this. Councilmember Buscaino has been outspoken about it as well.
We're more of a donor port.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
well, and which is no surprise. I mean, that's kind of the nature of California, but it makes me doubly concerned that we're about to, be led by a federal administration that is threatened to withdraw from the Paris Accords and doesn't believe in climate change. So is there a risk to what you're doing if that federal funding is at risk?
Yes, it certainly would not be as good as we would like, but we are not even in the slightest bit deterred. We will do what we have to do, and if it means working with industry to find other ways to fund things, we will. Certainly, California and our agencies here in California have been very generous and very supportive. But your point is important. It's just if you see me, it's that we're not going to back down. If anything, we feel like we need to go out and educate some people in Washington about the importance of these problems.
Terrific. Thank you.
Great. Seeing no question. Well, one last technical question. On the environmental ship index incentive, I noticed it's retroactive, or it's proposed to be retroactive. What's the reason for going
Because
back?
the payment occurs in the calendar year, and so the way it's set up, and I don't know if we actually, I didn't really go through it, but all we did was change some rules because of some changes that are in place because of the low sulfur fuel. One of the things that was part of the environmental ship index is you got a high score for using low sulfur fuel. There are also some other changes like shore power and so forth. You got a score for that. But since those things are now part of the law, then all of a sudden people automatically get more money just by virtue of complying with the law. So we changed the rules a little bit to encourage them to do the things that are ahead of regulation. We did so in about the middle of the year, or last the last third of the year, but we have to have it be retroactive to apply throughout the year because it's a calendar year. So this 2016 calendar year is what this would apply to.
Okay. Yeah, I always get a little concerned when I see incentives that are retroactive, but that makes sense to me.
Well, it has to. I mean, if we didn't do it, it would get worse. If
Yeah.
we didn't wait. We tried to see. We could have done this in the beginning of the year. We thought perhaps that there wouldn't be as much of a need and that we could wait until the next calendar year. But the fact is, we can't. So otherwise, we're just going to run out of money. In fact, I'm already pushing the edge of my budget for this particular program. So we have to do it. This will help us a little bit and save us a little bit of money.
And if I can, Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
on the bonnet system, I know you mentioned creating some incentives. Would that be memorialized in the new plan?
You'll hear from me on that. In the new environmental ship index, yes, it's also in the Clean Air Action Plan. We make reference to it, but it is only made reference to in general terms, which is to say that we're going to find ways to encourage its use. My proposed plan, which I hope to bring before you in the coming months, is to make modifications to the environmental ship index program so that you actually get reductions in berth fees or other kinds of dockage fees for using that type of equipment. If you can't plug in, but you can use the bonnet, you get a benefit right there. So that should increase the incentive and certainly its use because people will be able to get a financial reward for it.
And Carl, if you haven't experienced that, it's the bonnet system's on a barge. It goes up to the container ship that's not equipped, plug, amp ready.
That's right.
And I know in recent LA Times articles it indicated with TraPac that they're not in 100% compliance because some of the ships weren't even amped ready. So now I know.
Well, you didn't ask me, Joe, but I'm proud to say that TraPac is.
100%
I just ran their numbers today. I was wondering if you were going to ask me. They're in good shape.
They are in good shape. Good.
Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear.
I was worried that you were going to say something, so I better have an answer.
I know.
You almost got away with it right at the end.
I know. That's
Not
a
in there.
concern of ours. So thank you.
Councilmember Buscaino always holds our feet to the fire.
Good. And we Appreciate the good work. So on number one is informational, so I'm going to ask without objection to note and file. Item 2 that we just discussed, the recommendation will be to approve the CAO and port recommendations.
Move the item.
Moved, seconded, without objection, it's so ordered. Great. The next item sequentially is 8, but we're going to take up 9 in respect to the timing of our law enforcement folks. And just the outset, we're going to begin this in open session, colleagues. We don't have to go into closed session, but we do have that option. So I also state that to all of our presenters, that if there's any questions or something that you want to add that makes you uncomfortable in terms of open session because of security or agendized to go into closed session, just let me know that, and we will move to that portion of the hearing, and we'll have a portion of this hearing in closed session. That being said, Mr. Gannon.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I am Pat Gannon, Deputy Executive Director for Public Safety and Security at Los Angeles World Airports. I'm joined at the table today by Chief of Airport Police David Maggard and LAWA Director of Emergency Manager Mr. Ed Bushman. Also joining us today and are seated out in the audience are our LAPD partners from Operations West Bureau, Deputy Chief John Peters and Commander Blake Chow. Our presentation this afternoon involves an August 28, 2016 incident that occurred at LAX where there were multiple false reports of an active shooter in the airport. I'll provide a brief overview of the incident while Chief Maggard will present a PowerPoint of the incident, including a summary of what went right in the incident and where improvements can be made. Ed Bushman, retired LA City Fire Battalion Chief, who is our new emergency manager at the airport, was the author of the after action report, and he, along with Chief Maggard and myself, will be available to answer any questions you might have regarding this incident. On August the 28th, 2016, it was a busy Sunday evening at LAX. Airport police officers responded to a call for service that an individual dressed in black, wearing a mask, and carrying a sword was seen in Terminal 7. Officers responded to the incident, located the individual, took him into custody, only to find out that the individual was in costume and was waiting for a friend to arrive at the airport. As officers completed this investigation, emergency calls for service were received in the Airport Police Dispatch Center of an active shooter in Terminal 8 at Gate 82. Airport police responded immediately to these reports of shots being fired. The incident, which proved to be false, impacted hundreds of passengers and caused a major disruption to LAX, which included 27 diversions of aircraft to other airports, 13 of which were diverted to Ontario International Airport. 381 flights experienced a delay in either arriving or departing, and 2 flights were canceled. Airport police, airport operations, and partner agencies, including the Los Angeles Police Department and Los Angeles Fire Department, came together in a unified command to work through all of the issues present during an active shooter event where there is a mass evacuation of airport terminals. Even though we were able to determine within 30 minutes that there was not an active shooter, this incident took many hours for the airport to completely recover. Following the incident, we conducted debriefs with public safety personnel, which impacted airlines, and began the process of completing an after-action report. The after-action report has helped us determine what worked well in this incident and where improvements need to be made. The 3 of us at this table have nearly 100 years of combined public safety experience that includes responding to or managing some of the most significant emergency incidents in Southern California. As with any large incident, many people are going to be impacted, and no incident is ever perfect. We all learn from these experiences and use them to get better in the future. The council motion that brought us together today mentioned a similar incident that occurred at JFK Airport in New York, and there was concern that these 2 incidents may have been coordinated events aimed at testing airport security and vulnerabilities. On October the 4th, 2016, LAWA assembled a panel of nationally recognized experts in airport security, counterterrorism, emergency management, and crowd behavior to examine the events of August the 28th. Included on this panel was Mr. Tom Bellafore, Chief Security Officer, New York, New Jersey Port Authority, who was able to give us a detailed briefing on the false active shooter event at JFK, which had occurred on October the 14th, just a week or so prior. These two events were initiated under very different circumstances, but they were a number of similarities that were identified. Through our analysis of both events, there is absolutely nothing to suggest that these events were an attempt by a group or individual to test our security and to identify potential vulnerabilities. Last month, the Governor's Office in New York released the findings of their review of the JFK incident. In the report, they made 4 overarching recommendations, including the need for a unified operations center at JFK, mandatory annual training for all law enforcement and security personnel, training for airport workers, and the creation of a mass evacuation plan. LAX has been working with the Port Authority and have provided them with emergency protocols developed after our November the 1st, 2013 shooting. At LAX, we are fortunate to have a unified operations center. The LAX Airport Resource Coordination Center has been in place for the past 5 years and brings together all disciplines needed to run the airport on a daily basis and in an emergency. This coordination center brings together airport landside, airside operations, police resources, traffic control, TSA, Customs and Border Protection, and CCT coverage of all in one location. We are looking forward to interacting with the Port Authority to see how we can enhance our own operations center based upon their findings. For the past 4 years, Airport Police Operations and Emergency Management, LAPD, LA City Fire, TSA, Customs and Border Protection have conducted yearly training using an empty passenger terminal to practice our response to an active shooter event, which includes tactical movements, command and control, and tactical emergency medical response scenarios. During the weekend of October the 29th and 30th this year, approximately 500 airport police safety partners from agencies mentioned above received training in these important topics. Shortly after the November 1st, 2013 shooting, Los Angeles Fire Assistant Chief Armando Hogan designed a monthly training program at LAX to include all of the stakeholders at LAX where we practice our emergency response plans. This is referred to as trunk top training. The plan contains our emergency response plan contains nearly 20 specific annexes having to do with a wide variety of emergency incidents that could occur at LAX. We practice these plans each month. Emergency management has been working with airport tenants and stakeholders and has developed training modules for evacuation and floor warden programs. Our emergency management has teamed up with service workers represented by SEIU to push out run, hide, fight, evacuation, and emergency communication training. We will continue to interact with the Port Authority and others to identify best practices that are being developed as a result of not only these incidents, but others that have occurred. Unfortunately, active shooter incidents have become very common in the United States and have occurred at LAX in 2002 at the El Al ticket counter and again at 2013 in Terminal 3. In addition, recent events this year of terrorist bombings and shootings at airports in Brussels, Belgium, and Istanbul, Turkey, have made the public aware of the possibility of these incidents and the actions they should take. People in the public areas, when confronted with real or perceived threats, are quickly to follow the run, hide, fight strategy. If this incident had been a real one, the August 28th incident had been a real one, many positive outcomes would have been the speed in which the people were able to flee the airport. In our incident of August the 28th, it was difficult to quickly determine the validity of the reports of an active shooter as rumors spread fast across many terminals. Understanding what is going on takes a little time, and providing timely information to people who were caught up in the incident remains our biggest challenge. Thank you for the opportunity to present our findings today, and I'll now turn the presentation over to Chief Maggard.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and honorable council members. My name is Dave Maggard. I'm the Airport Police Chief. I'll apologize ahead of time. I'm battling a little bit of a cold. But I do want to, as the Director said, provide you with a chronology and a bit of a presentation with regards to the specifics of the response that we had on the night of August 28th. Really, there was an initial response that I'll talk about briefly, and there was a secondary response, which now has become commonly referred to as the false active shooter response. So this is the first call that we received on Sunday night was a call of a man dressed in all black, wearing a mask and carrying a sword in the lower level of our Terminal 7 near a bathroom. And so what I'd like to do is take you through the response that we had. Let me see if I can play that call for you. I think it's important to note that you'll hear on the last part of that call that it was someone that was a LAWA employee that was part of our operation. So the information that our dispatcher is receiving is someone suspicious, someone obviously that could pose a potential threat, and it was coming from a credible source, one of our own LAWA employees. So what we'll be doing, the first part of this response is contacting a man that we think first is just dressed in this generic way, which later we recognize is dressed with kind of a top hat and a mask with a sword. We have video observation officers that are monitoring our 3,000 cameras in the ARC, as Director Gannon had indicated, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There was some huge value in having our video observation officers immediately have an ability to put eyes on this suspect because they were later able to direct our officers responding on the ground to the specific location of the person. I'll show you a quick video of the contact that we had with the man described in that first call. You see officers come in on the right-hand side of your screen. They're giving him directions to lie down, face down, separate himself from what we believe to be a sword. And you'll see a number of officers move in. There's a canine officer that has responded to the call as well. See the officer on the far left will have something in his hand. It's a taser, not a handgun. So you see that there was 5 of our officers that were present. Were able to detain him fairly quickly without any issues. He did not struggle at all. He essentially obeyed the commands, and he was detained fairly quickly. I'd like to provide you with a timeline. I'm going to try and use this cursor here. At 8:34 is when we received the first call that you heard just a moment ago. The lower level Terminal 7 man with the sword. At 8:38, which is here at the bottom, our first units arrived to the location they were dispatched to, which is again near the restroom of lower level Terminal 7. It was a 4-minute response time. However, the subject had already moved from the restroom area, and so what happened next was our video observation officer was able to locate the man on the video screens and then started broadcasting to the officers on the ground a better and more specific location about where they could contact him. At the same time, one of our traffic officers, who are, though not sworn officers, have our radios, and there was a radio broadcast to our traffic officers as well, also was on the lookout for the man and did identify him, and then also radioed in to provide our police officers with more specific location. And then at 8:42, our officers made contact with him, and you saw the contact there in our video just a moment ago. As we're identifying the person that we contacted and recognizing that the sword that he has is actually a plastic sword, we're taking handcuffs off him and identifying him. A minute and a half or so later, at 8:44, we receive in the dispatch center another call, and I'm going to try and play that for you here. So this is an airline employee, again, not someone who doesn't identify themselves. It's a trusted source, someone that works in the airport every day, and you can hear the very first call. He's indicating that someone's shooting. You can hear he's very anxious and very concerned about what he's seeing and then what he's hearing from people that are passing by. That's the first call that we receive, and he's talking about Gate 82 in Terminal 8. So Terminal 8 is directly adjacent to Terminal 7, so our officers who had made the contact with the man with the plastic sword immediately respond to Terminal 8. It's very close by, and within a minute and 3 seconds, our officers are in Terminal 8 and beginning a search for what they believe now is someone who is firing a weapon, and they're treating this as an active shooter situation. At 8:46, a minute 37 seconds after we received the call in Terminal 8, we received this call. So by now our dispatch center is getting flooded with calls. Some of them are repeat calls to Terminal 8. Others are more generic calls about people who appear to be panicking. This particular call now at 8:46 is specific to Terminal 4, which of course is now a considerable distance away from Terminal 8. And so you could hear the dispatcher is trying to kind of make sense of what they're receiving. They're receiving a lot of different calls, and now you heard her say Terminal 4. She hadn't had a call yet on Terminal 4. So now she logs in for Terminal 4 and starts sending our officers in that area. If you jump down now at 8:47, our officers have moved through most of Terminal 8 and gotten down to Gate 82, which was the specific initial point of the call that you heard a few minutes ago. And within 2 minutes and 36 seconds, they haven't seen anyone who would be shooting or any threat to the airport. Excuse me, by the time they get to Gate 82. At 8:47, about 3 minutes after, the watch commander on duty, who now has only received information that there's multiple calls of an active shooter in Terminal 8, and now multiple calls of an active shooter in Terminal 4, makes a decision to shut down the central terminal area in traffic to try and start getting a better handle on what in fact he has, and to start making sure that if there really are active shooters here, we start preserving the safety of the people that might be entering into the airport. At 8:51, again, there are further detailed searches of Terminal 8 that have gone on. Still no reports of or no signs of a shooter or any shots fired in Terminal 8. But at 8:52, 7 minutes after the original call, this call comes in. So throughout the evening, we had received transfer calls from CHP, transfer calls from LAPD, calls from some distance away where someone had been hiding in a part of the airport who were texting information to loved ones, concerned loved ones, and then they would then reach us and pass on this secondhand information. And so now we already have the reports in 8 and 4. Now we have it in Terminal 1 about 7 minutes and 43 seconds later. At 8:53, TSA reports that in Terminal 1, an individual ran to Terminal 1 and stated there was an active shooter and all passengers ran inside. So this is now reported to us from a TSA source, and they're hearing in the Terminal 1 area that there's an active shooter, and people are moving through that terminal now, and they can tell that there's a tremendous sense of anxiousness and some described panic during that period of time. At 8:53, we get updates from information, reports of shots fired for Terminal 1, Terminal 4, and Terminal 7. So as we're getting a little bit higher confidence that we haven't been able to find anybody, at least in Terminal 8, calls continue to come in for Terminal 1, Terminal 4, and Terminal 7. At 8:54, Terminal 1, Terminal 4, and Terminal 6 and Terminal 7 are impacted by unscreened passengers in the sterile areas. This is when we have a number of people that are self-evacuating. They've gone through some of the screening areas as a result of the information that they've heard and seen from other passengers who are basically running through the terminals indicating that there's an active shooter. So some of these people have, because of the proximity to the screening area, they've actually run through the screening area. There are some screening areas where TSA is no longer present because they've been alerted to the active shooter as well. And so some of the passengers moved through those screening areas, and there were even some that went through fire life safety doors and went out into the airfield. At 9:12, we get a report that there's no evidence of shots fired, so we have officers deployed in all those terminals. They're doing what is a rapid but as thorough as possible search that they're conducting. I know that you know this, but I think it's important to note that there were officers that were working that night who had responded to the 2013 shooting. There were TSA officers that were working that night that were present during the 2013 shooting. And so for us, it's not about a what if or this couldn't happen. Some people that were actually working that night had lived through the events of just 3 years ago. So we're trying to move through the terminals as quickly as possible, but we are indeed looking for someone who's firing with a firearm. At 9:13, we received a report that multiple passengers on roadways and unattended bags. This prevents the immediate reopening of the CTA. However, we do start talking about the repopulation of the terminals, and so there is a distinction. So the roadway has to remain closed, but we are talking to TSA leadership throughout this event, starting to indicate that we're gaining, at least in some of the terminals, a higher level of confidence that we can begin rescreening and repopulating those terminal areas. At 10:07, all passengers are escorted off the airfield. What had occurred for the people that had self-deployed onto the airfield was one of our police sergeants, along with our airport operations staff, had basically corralled them in one area, making sure that they stay safe and that we can keep track of them because they're obviously in a sterile location. And then at 10:07, they bring them all together, and in one large group, they bring them back into a more controlled area out of the sterile area. At 10:13, our canine units conduct terminal sweeps, and then at 10:30, we make a determination that we can reopen the central terminal area. We've worked closely with TSA up to this point now to assure that the terminals are safe, there's no threats, and we begin the repopulation process that includes rescreening the people that have ran through the sterile areas. Finally, at 10:42, all terminals and screening areas reopen. But as Director Gannon indicated, there were obviously several hours where it took to bring the airport into what we would refer to as a normal operation for a Sunday night. Some of the things that we believe went well that night, I'm proud of the response that our officers demonstrated. They moved through the terminals quickly and safely. They were truly looking for an active shooter. And so our ability to make determinations that we couldn't find any sign of active shooters actually occurred pretty quickly. We were able to move into those effective terminals up and down the corridors rapidly and safely. Our video observation officers did a nice job. Once again, we have those 3,000 cameras that are being monitored and utilized 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it was our video observation officers that made initial eyes on our possible man with a sword, and were able to bring our officers in safely and provide specific information about where he was. Our unified command was quickly established, and as Director Gannon indicated, we had our partners from LAPD, from Air Operations, all of the people that were responsible that night for making sure that the airport stayed safe and that we could then repopulate it quickly. We're all there and we're in unified command. Our dispatchers did a great job handling the high volume of call and a very high number and percentage of calls that were transferred to us, maintaining contact with our officers out in the field in a very critical situation. Our DOC maintained a supporting role. We had a number of people respond quickly to our DOC, and they were very instrumental in the support of our command post that night. And then, of course, we utilized various communication technologies that night that I'll go into in a little bit greater detail now. We utilized a visual messaging system. We have display terminals in the ticketing terminals in the airport, and this is an example of one of the displayed messages. There has been an unconfirmed report of a shooting in Terminal 8. Airport police has not been able to verify or validate this report. Passengers who have self-evacuated to the ramp or street are requested to remain in place until airport police has cleared all the terminal and reopened the roadway. Excuse me. These terminal message machines are also in our Tom Bradley terminal as well, and were displayed similarly. We have a number of both stationary and portable signs around the airport, and so there was information that was provided to update people that were in the perimeter area. An example, when the situation that evening was resolved, the message indicates all safety concerns have been resolved. Please proceed to your terminal. For the first time at the airport, we utilized the wireless emergency alert system. As many of you know, this is a very powerful technology that when you provide the technology a geofence, it can provide a message, in this case a public safety message, to anyone who might be carrying a smartphone within that geofence. And so we believe that to be a very powerful technology that we utilized that night for the first time, and of course we believe that has great power and opportunities for us in the future as we become more familiar with that and actually bring the WIA system to the airport. Some challenges that we identified, and you probably have read in our report, is that though we have public address system coverage in our public areas along the terminal curbside, generally speaking, the deeper that you get into the terminals, the more challenged we are with regard to 100% coverage of our PA system. So we recognize that as an issue and have plans, of course, to address that as we move forward. Additionally, though we have a robust CCTV coverage at the airport, there are still some areas where we don't have full coverage, and there still are some proprietary video monitors that we are working on, making sure that there's ways for us to get approval and a blended technology so that we can utilize air carrier and other third-party video that might be valuable to us. And although we use the WIA alert system for the first time, our geofence was a little bit larger than what it should have been, so we ended up sending messages to people that were outside the perimeter of the airport, and it took us a little bit longer to utilize that than we would have liked to, or had we had more experience to be able to use it that night. So we recognize that as an issue that we need to do better. Our command post was, if you know where our police station is located at 96 in Sepulveda, our command post that night was located in a parking area directly across the street from our police station. We see that as a partial success because it was out of the central terminal area. We learned a lot of lessons, obviously, in 2013 about the proximity for our command post to the action and how challenging that can be. So there was some benefit of having it out of the CTA, out of the central terminal area. However, as the incident grew larger, we recognized that command post was still too close to the airport. And so in the future, we really will be relying upon Fire Station 5, which is a pre-designated command post location for us, so that if there would be a similar event that would occur tonight, we would certainly go to Fire Station 5 because it is a premier location for us that's close enough, but not in a area where if we started to get congestion around our command post, that we wouldn't have multiple ways to get in. Tsa Communications, there were some communications by TSA, well-intentioned and appropriate based on the training that they had received, that unfortunately moved information through the terminal areas faster and in a way that we weren't able to manage and control. And so that did spread the news and information about the reports of the active shooter. They were They were moved through the airport in a sincere way, that they were trying to alert their colleagues about what was going on in one particular terminal. Unfortunately, that did have the ability to create more anxiety in the other parts of the airport as well. We've talked to TSA about that, and they're working on ways to make sure that they can keep their employees safe, keep their employees informed, and at the same time make sure that we're not adding to a situation that might not be confirmed. And then finally, and perhaps most significantly, the traffic congestion that occurred outside the airport as a result of us closing the CTA. We could have done better that night. We recognize the impact that closing the CTA has on the Sepulveda and the Century Corridor. We have spent a considerable amount of time already talking about how we could do that better. Again, if a similar situation occurred tonight, and making sure that we work with our partners from LAPD, and if time allows, the Department of Transportation, to make sure that we're mitigating the traffic issues that might occur as a result of closing the central terminal area. So that was certainly a lesson learned for us as well. Just wanted to give you a couple of examples of some of the ways that we tried to provide information and communicate in real time. This is an example of our airport police Twitter account. Reports of active shooter at LAX unconfirmed, police investigating, police searching LAX after reports, all precautions being taken to ensure safety of the public. Remain calm. Thank you for your cooperation. Excuse me, there was a number of public tweets that you can imagine. People move this information throughout the airport and really throughout the country very quickly. Again, a lot of the information was not accurate, even based on the information that we had received. Shooting confirmed at Terminal 5 at LAX. That 5 was never in play. Active shooter currently in customs area of Terminal 8. That's not accurate information. So there was a number, as you would anticipate in this day and age, there was a number of social media posts and Twitter movement that made it difficult. There's always someone with a very large following at LAX any time of the day or night. Lester Holt was there that night, and so he began sending out information on his Twitter account, and others who have significant following that aren't quite as known to all also spent quite a lot of time indicating what they perceived or what they had heard, and picked up second and third hand, including some photographs. Excuse me. One of the things that we've done post this event is revisited the technology that is often referred to as shot spotter. This has been a successful technology in many parts of the country, but frankly has not had a lot of use in indoor environments. And about 3 or 4 weeks ago, Director Gannon and I met with the leadership of at least one of the proprietary providers of this technology, and they have indicated to us that they believe that they have successfully created a technology that could be more reliable in an indoor environment to be able to differentiate whether or not an actual gunshot has actually occurred, which of course would be important information on a like type of an event. So they're doing some work in some university settings. We've had good initial meetings with them, and we will be continuing to meet with them, and perhaps even taking some trips to identify the possibility of utilizing this type of technology at LAX. Finally, we brought in psychologists to talk to us about this whole notion of crowd management, especially when there's anxiety and that could lead up to panic. And if there were ways that they could help suggest to us to either prevent or mitigate that type of momentum as it started that night at LAX. Of course, our partners at JFK, as Director Gannon had indicated, have a similar interest. The psychologists that we talked to were very fascinated about what had happened and have done research in these areas, but frankly don't have today a lot of suggestion about how to utilize even the most advanced technology to really move people as this kind of momentum creates. But we have made some good partnerships and relationships now. We want to continue that dialogue and conversation and see if we can be helpful to them in their research so that they can be ultimately helpful to us and our public safety partners, as this is a situation that we're concerned could happen, not just in an airport environment, but any place where large numbers of the public are gathered and someone starts providing information that either may or may not be accurate and starts a crowd panic. Finally, as Director Gannon indicated, we immediately did research making sure that our analysts and others didn't believe that this was some type of a test for us, that this was someone who had put this information into our system so that they could test our response. We believe this was simply an overreaction of what probably was someone who had observed the contact that we had with the man with the mask and the plastic sword, and that they perceived that as a higher level of concern or threat than it really was, and pass that information on. And as things sometimes occur, someone hears one part of a story, they make it more dramatic, they make it louder, they make it more detailed, and that's how that momentum started, both with social media and people's kind of visual and auditory passing along of that information, and that's where we found ourselves that night. We spent a significant amount of time on in this event. We recognize that there's some things that we can and should do better if we were in a situation where this would occur again. And we've talked to people that we know have gone through these kinds of things, people that would have a perspective that would be helpful to us, and continue to look for ways to make sure that we're ready, both for a real type of event or an event like this that could happen again, so that we could try and intervene and mitigate the concern that people might have in these real-time situations. As Director Gannon said, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And I mean, it's fascinating how this all just exploded, and at the same time it's very scary. I mean, you mentioned a lot of the very positive things that came out of this in terms of our response time, but of course the glaring concern is how do we prevent this kind of panic from leading to things. And I don't know if this happened today that we don't have any safeguards in place, additional safeguards on that panic element to prevent that spread, other than, I guess, some of the increases in communication. And maybe I'll start with that question is, what are the things that are in place today that we've learned since then that would help us prevent the psychological, the panic mentality that just led to expansion of this incident?
I'll take the first part of that. I think the first thing that has been really helpful, just from the police standpoint, is the conversation with our officers. As you can see in the video, our contact with the man with the sword was textbook. It could have been a sword. It wasn't a sword. We're grateful for that. But our officers contacted him and were able to detain him quickly, used very little force as a result, and though you didn't see it in the video, were able to release him quickly and basically indicate that there was no threat and move on. But I think that making sure that our officers have a clear understanding about doing any type of police-related activity, particularly something that might be higher profile or where weapons might be pointed at someone, in this environment, in a busy airport like LAX, we need to make sure that we're mindful of that. We need to make sure that we're thoughtful about that. We don't want our officers to hesitate. We want them to be safe. We want them to take the safeguards that they need to do because they thought that this was a real event. But we also want to make sure that we're talking through a police response, particularly a high-level police response at LAX. And as Director Gannon indicated, we did a fairly significant training about 6 weeks ago now or so, and that was part of the things that we addressed, was making sure that if we are responding to what we believe to be an active shooter or other kind of high-level threat, that we're doing it in a way that we also are thinking about the perception and the other pieces of the safety as people are watching us respond and responding to how we respond. The second thing is that I think we are feeling more comfortable with the WIA technology. We think that that's a powerful technology that if we can make sure that we're prepared with public safety messages, that we can get out quickly clarity in terms of information. I'm sorry, yes, the wireless emergency alert system that penetrates the smartphones. That could be very helpful because, again, I think people, they may not hear a public address system in the background, but they will respond to their phone. It's becoming second nature, and when they look at that phone and they see that it comes from a trusted source, airport police says or indicates, that could be, and I think will be very helpful to us in like kinds of situations. And so we're moving forward on making sure that we're ready to utilize that technology in a more robust and effective way. And then, of course, we're already working very quickly on identifying the public address system gaps that we may have, as well as the camera gaps. So those kinds of things are already moving forward, and we're already picking up some good momentum on that. So I think we would be better positioned tonight, but there's still some things that we think that we want to make sure that we do and learn to be even better prepared as we go forward.
The other part of it is making sure we have good understanding of what the facts are, too. So in this particular case, the officers did not completely, there was no indication that one incident led to the other initially. Those were two separate incidents as far as the officers were concerned. They dealt with the individual in the mask with the sword, and then shortly thereafter, a call of an active shooter comes out. There was not an immediate link in the responding officers that one led to the other. If we had that link, you could very easily get your arms around something and begin to put out information. The problem was we did not know whether or not, or the officers did not know, we did not know whether or not that was good information or not. So even though it took just 30 minutes to clear 5 terminals, that's pretty quick. It was still a long time. That's still a long time for people acting upon false reports that they had seen. So our ability to put out information, as you saw in the tweets, that basically said there is police activity, we are investigating, rather than saying we couldn't put out information that said that this wasn't true. So having that balance proves to be quite a challenge for anybody dealing with these kind of issues.
And there was new technology that was put in place since the November incident, 2013. WIA was part of that? Or what were the other technologies that were put in place after the shooting, the real one, and then before this incident?
The WIA technology has been around in the city for a little while. It just hasn't been used because there wasn't an incident that drove it. The WIA technology is not a LA airport technology. It's a city technology that is really developed by Jim Featherstone, who's at the EOC, and LAPD's Racer Division is responsible for coordinating those messages that go out. But because it hadn't been used very often, or if at all, it was cumbersome initially in trying to make that work. And so part of our process is to make sure that we improve that. The camera systems for technology, the airport shortly after the November 1st shooting completed a $48 million upgrade to its CCD camera coverage. A great part of that had been done prior to the November 1st shooting, and quite a bit of it, and then others were finished after that particular shooting. The public address systems that we addressed, and even though we don't have full coverage at the airport, significant upgrades in our ability to control messaging using public address system through our ARC, our Airport Resource Coordination Center, and be able to put that information out to many different public areas and to most of our terminals has been completed. There's other terminals that are under construction or because of some other technology issues where we have some difficulties with that. There are some, without getting into too much detail, there are other pieces of technology that are at our disposal that we can use in order to communicate with all of our terminals also. I'll just leave it at that without saying what that is. But we have improved all of those. Many of the issues that related to the November 1st shooting, the shooting itself and the response of the officers and how they responded to the incident and confronted the attacker and took him into custody. That incident took 4 minutes and 8 seconds from the time our officers were notified. There was really no improvement that could be made in that area. That was really a textbook along the way. A lot of our issues had to be about our ability to communicate. There was an over-reliance on social media, was one of the criticisms that we have. That's why we tried to use WIA and to improve our public address systems. Our ability to care and comfort for people and provide them with information was a big issue, and so we've incrementally tried to improve that. The airport has come up with a, I'm going to lose the Barbie Yamamoto's group.
Customer service, guest experience.
Guest Experience has a program that will immediately responds out to incidents at terminals and provides additional people into the terminals, volunteers and others, airport employees, to be able to communicate with passengers and be able to pass along additional information. Those are the kind of things that we have put in place to improve communication along the way.
And in terms of the people who got out onto the runway, how did, what are we doing to prevent that type of thing, and how did they actually?
Well, that's not something I want to prevent, to be honest with you. That is there are fire life safety doors throughout our terminals that we have to maintain the ability to allow people to get out of the building in an event of an emergency. That's part of our emergency plan. Being able to corral them once they get out onto the airfield is where not only are we challenged, but we rely upon all of our stakeholders and other airport employees to be able to corral them. Part of our ongoing plan is that we have airfield buses that are running, that are LAWA buses that run 24 hours a day. Our emergency plan dictates that those individuals who are out on the AOA will be picked up, will be segregated and picked up by those AOA buses and either airfield buses and either transported to a safe terminal or we will shepherd them back into the terminals. But we have to keep fire life safety doors unlocked. There are monitors that monitor all of those particular doors in the sense of electronic monitoring to it, but to reduce the ability for people to exit out in an emergency would be a bad idea.
I'm certainly not suggesting that's what we do, but in terms of preventing them from actually feeling the need to go out there is the.
Well, there again, I think that we get into a discussion, and it's an interesting discussion, and we've had this discussion ourselves, between in an incident, what constitutes an evacuation that could be orderly versus what constitutes really an escape in an incident where people feel like their lives are in an imminent danger. So we have at the airport, as does City Hall and every municipal building, has a really robust floor warden program with evacuation procedures and those types of things. And in an earthquake, for example, if it was to occur right now, all of us would get underneath the tables. We would hold on. We would wait for the shaking to stop. Floor wardens within the City Hall would come and help escort us out of the building with flashlights and hard hats and helmets. It's well organized and choreographed. When you're talking about an active shooter potentially being in a terminal, that kind of orderly evacuation can't take place or wouldn't take place because people are fleeing for their lives at that particular point. And you're not going to be able to ask unarmed people, non-sworn police officers, to act in that way. Many do, as we saw in November 1st in our 2013 shooting, heroic actions on the part of many of our contract employees and others. So I think our ability to be able to get information as quickly as we possibly can, I think that at some point, and I hate to even ask people to do this, but there's going to have to be a pause. There's going to have to be a pause, and part of our training and moving forward and talking with our stakeholders has been, how do we confirm what you think you know? As you heard on the phone calls, those people thought they heard gunshots. Yeah. They believe they heard gunshots, and so in their mind, they believe in that's there, whether somebody told them that or whether they heard somebody hit a panic bar on a door, whether bags were falling, whatever the case that may be, it's very difficult to be able to control that kind of information and the flow of that information. Our ability to get into an incident, we're trained and we train our officers when responding to an active shooter incident. You don't stop to answer a bunch of questions. You don't stop to even render aid to people who may be hurt or have been shot in active shooters. It's a tough thing to ask. We ask them to go to the threat and to stop the threat and then work backwards. That is a national protocol, training protocol for that. So when you put all of those kind of things together, it challenges us to be able to ask people to take a pause when they hear something. Our ability to get people into the terminals as quickly as possible, determine what happened, and control that piece, I think, is our best choice in that matter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for the presentation and the report and the slideshow. First of all, let me commend you for the work that you do in keeping the airport safe, the work that you did on November 1st, the work you did on August 28th. First responders did a remarkable job on both of those occasions and on every day. I often say that LAX is a series of small miracles every day. The fact that it functions, and the task that you have, I appreciate significantly, because if you were going to design an airport to be conducive to safety and security, you would not design a horseshoe with a big, huge parking structure in the middle of it. And we know that this is an airport that has had, in the past, threats against it, and we've certainly had incidents, and it's something we always have to guard against. That said, I was also there on November 1st that day, not when it happened, but shortly afterwards, along with the mayor and Gina Marie Lindsay, and there was a lot of stuff that was in the sort of second and third response that was very concerning. And I was glad that Lawa then did the after-action report. That was really good. One of the things, and I don't want to take away from the very thorough work you did in the report here, but one of the things I've been hoping to see in the report was an actual listing of everything the November 1 action report said needed to be done, and a listing of which of those things were in place and should have been done on August 28th, and either were or weren't, and which ones still haven't been implemented. So give us a benchmark for that. So when you do you're doing another report, after action report in April, I believe, on this?
The next step is the implementation plan.
Yeah.
Where we take these recommendations, these high-level recommendations, and develop the actual tasks we need to accomplish in order to solve these recommendations. That's the one that should be.
But we can get that information for you.
Yeah, I'd also like, because this is great, looking at the day fresh to see what worked and what didn't. But I want to make sure we don't lose the context of the November 1 after action report. It may be stuff we're doing much better at than we ever would have anticipated, and then there's stuff that maybe we thought we had in place that isn't in place yet. Maybe it's captured in the recommendations, but just having it sort of side by side would be helpful.
And we do have that. I mean, there was about 100 recommendations in the November 1st shooting incident. I think just shy of 30 of those recommendations played into this incident here on the 28th. I'm going off the top of my head on some of these numbers, but a good percentage of those we did better. There were some that we didn't do as well as we had hoped to. The last part of that on things that still haven't been accomplished, there are items from that after action report that have not been accomplished yet. We had a timeline that we had put together 3 years ago that went out almost 4 years on some things. About 90% of the items have been completed, and there are some big ticket items that are expensive that we're still working through.
Great. Yeah, being able to see that all in one place would be helpful.
You got it.
So I literally could ask a couple hours worth of questions, but don't worry, I won't. this isn't Benghazi, but there are a couple areas I do want to touch on and ask and drill down on a bit. In the wake of the November 1 incident, I did some traveling, I did some consultation, met with folks at Tel Aviv airport, and there were certain things I really focused on in the wake of November 1. And, one of them was the evacuation stuff. Another was sort of the public notification, the care and feeding of the passengers, and sort of the whole of community approach that they do in other places. Let me ask about the evacuation stuff first. Mr. Blumenfield raised it. I understand that it's certainly preferable in a lot of situations for folks to self-evacuate out onto the tarmac. I imagine, though, that also creates other vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
For instance, we could have a situation where someone, well, let me put it this way, I know we're confident that nobody did these incidents deliberately to learn vulnerabilities, but if you're looking for vulnerabilities, I'm sure you could examine what's been going on and pick some stuff up. So one of the things that concerned me that night was, could someone be right outside the security area, and then when the incident happens, they run into the secure area, either into the terminal or out onto the tarmac. They haven't been searched yet. They haven't been through a checkpoint. So now you have someone in there who has the potential to be an additional active shooter. How do we check for that, capture that, make sure that person isn't in there or remains at large?
Is that a possibility? Yes. The answer to that question is yes. So as we recover, so in this particular instance, the officers go through and there's no evidence of a shooting or anything taking place. Each of those terminals that were impacted are then have to become sterile once again. And so everybody is removed from those terminals. Dogs are brought through to, bomb canines are brought through the airport to inspect all areas within those terminals to ensure that nothing was brought in and secreted anywhere. That takes a considerable amount of time. And then as people are taken out, they're brought back through screening and rescreened back into the airport to make it sterile once again.
If we don't have an accurate count of how many people went through, how do we know how do we know that they're all back out?
Because you clear the terminal completely. Before you ever start to repopulate the terminal, you clear the terminal completely. So there would be nobody in the terminal as you repopulate it.
And the same is true of the tarmac?
The same would be through as far as...
Like if someone went out to the tarmac, how do we know that they've come back in?
I don't know how to answer that question. I don't. I mean, could somebody run from one terminal to the next on the tarmac and move along? I think the answer to that question is yes. I think one of the programs that is in place at LAX, or what is a strong deterrent to that, is that every badged employee at the airport understands what the who should be out on the airfield and who should not, and that their responsibility is to challenge anybody who is not and to safely get them back. Now, we do have passengers that, quite frankly, every now and then walk out the wrong door and end up in a place where they're not supposed to be. And we really rely on our employees to challenge those people to get them back where they should be. It is a big airport. There's a lot going on, and it's a lot of number of terminals. So I don't have a good answer to your question to absolutely guarantee you that nobody could slip through and end up somewhere where they're not. But the fact of the matter is, on that day and that night, everybody worked really hard, both our stakeholders and ourselves, to ensure that wouldn't happen.
Right.
What, if I may,
Yeah.
Councilman, on a smaller scale type of an event, and not on every life safety door, but there are video covered on many of those life safety doors. And so the ideal situation for us would be this. as soon as that door alarms where someone has gone through, we try to get the video observation officer to identify the people or persons who have gone through that area and then communicate that. And we have a patrol car on the airfield all the time. And so the ideal situation, particularly when you would have what I'll refer to as a manageable number that might have gone through those life safety doors, is to communicate that quickly with a description of the people so that the airfield car could contact them as quickly as possible. So you can't make a commitment that's 100% fail-safe, but those are the kinds of things that we put into place so that if something like that happened, then that's how we would respond to that type of a breach.
Yeah, as I was watching the news that night and I saw, I mean, there were, if my recollection is correct, I mean, there were dozens, scores of folks out there on the tarmac. The thing I kept asking is, how do we know if all of them have come back in? And I hadn't even thought they might go to another terminal. I was just thinking, what if they hadn't been screened, they were out there and they had some capability to do some damage to a plane, put something in with luggage, stuff like that. It gave me some worry just watching. Is that something we can think about more?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It is something that is an issue, and I think it deserves the thought behind it. I just don't have a solution for you right now.
Okay. Let me ask about the notification procedures. I noted in the report that there were a lot of terminals still, as you mentioned in your report, that don't have a public address system. Why are there some terminals that don't have a PA system?
Well, they all have public address systems.
But not a master one, right?
Yes, that's controlled by the ARC, by our Airport Resource Coordination Center. And every one of the areas around, all of our curbside and public areas in those areas have that ability to be able to communicate with them. So,
for instance, I'll use United as an example, just picking an airline. I don't know if they're one that we have a system in or not, but the PA system in one that we don't have master control over is controlled by the airline in that area, or Westfield, or?
No, you're right, the airline. The way that it was originally developed, and there's probably others in the audience, Roger Johnson and others, that could answer this better than I can. But really, the way that the airport was developed in the early days was that each of those terminals were independent.
Yeah.
It was United's domain, it was Pan Am's domain, it was whoever the tenant was there that was their domain, and nobody ever crossed those wires to make sure that we had those types of PA systems, public address systems that could be controlled for us. So after 2013 is when we really started to work on that particular project. We have run into some problems. We're not finished with the project by any stretch of the imagination. The first phase of that was to make sure that we could get as many of the public areas, so the ticketing areas in the terminus, the curbside areas, and baggage claim areas, that we could get those areas covered by a public address system. The deeper into the terminals still has public address systems that are controlled by the airlines, but because of some infrastructure challenges there, those are a harder fix for us to do. But each of the terminals many of the terminals are being currently redone in some way or another, and as we move forward, those issues are being addressed.
So, I mean, we just heard from the port earlier, and they've sort of, incentivized to use carrot and stick to get everybody involved down there to have a cleaner environmental record. I wouldn't think it would be all that hard to get the airlines to help us. Roger, Debbie?
Actually, the programs, especially United, Delta, Southwest, they're all tying in the PA system into our system. So we're requiring that as we go forward.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, I think she answers. There's a couple terminals that we've done that we're using. I'm sorry.
Okay.
There are a couple terminals that we're still upgrading, but through a lot of the upgrades that are being done right now by the tenants, those terminals will be done when the tenant work is done.
Okay.
So they'll be completely integrated.
Thank you. One of the things that stood out for me under the notification section was it said personnel dedicated to manage and coordinate LAWA's Everbridge templates for high-level hazards, WIA, Notify LA, et cetera, were inadequate because it's not part of the minimum staffing levels at LAWA. How do we get them to be part of the minimum staffing levels at LAWA? This seems like a pretty vital thing to have.
We agree. We would love to get additional people up to the ARC specifically designated just for communication. The challenge is that sitting a person in a chair for emergency communication to handle these multiple different communication systems is sometimes not fiscally responsible, and it is a challenge to get it passed. So we want to keep pushing that, push additional functionalities into those people that can move into that seat and become that communication section to have them to deal with all these different communication technologies that we have. Anytime you're dealing with these communications, a message that's 10 minutes old is old. And with different communication platforms, it's a challenge to keep them all up to date, all of them working properly. So we are working to try and get that communication position up there and get it staffed.
The other thing that we tried to do also, now this one occurred, 8 o'clock at night on a Sunday, which is presents another challenge, but is that how do we augment that staff in the coordination center? So Chief Bushman has done a really good job of creating training for other people that work that side of the airport. So as you know, Councilman, the ARC is on the west side of the airport. So a number of the offices that are over there can help support that in the event of an emergency. So we spend a tremendous amount of time training up additional people that can quickly go over to the ARC. Excuse me. Quickly go over to the ARC and maintain and pick up some of those functionalities there. That takes a little bit of time in a workday or even on a swing shift. It would be very easy to do. Our challenge is how do we get people in there off hours as quickly as possible to help support that effort also. Staffing should never be an issue or a problem. We should have appropriate staffing there, no matter what the day is. But balancing that and recognizing that you're always going to have some need to augment those resources.
Yeah, I was concerned by the lack of staffing for those positions, and also sort of on the night shift or the graveyard shift, people not being properly trained or in senior level positions for some of what would be appropriate under these circumstances. And I don't know that I can. The argument that it's sort of not that someone would argue. I'm not saying you were arguing it. That someone would argue it's not fiscally responsible just doesn't make sense to me. It's sort of like saying, well, the fire department's not fiscally responsible because they're not responding to fires all day long. I mean, you need to have this in place for when you need to have this in place.
There are minimum staffing levels. You're absolutely right that you should have for anything. You're correct.
But if I can say, as a contrast to November 1st, the first Everbridge message went out 2 minutes after the ARC was notified, which is one of the recommendations after November 1st is that the campus did not know what was going on. So that training and that messaging went out in this event, and it went out consistently, providing good updates through that one system.
Okay. And the final question I want to ask was about the whole of community approach, which I heard so much about in Tel Aviv, where the idea that in an emergency situation, not just the first responders, but the airline employees, the concession employees, the folks who work handling the baggage, should all sort of have a role to play in sort of herding a crowd or in taking care of passengers or having some sort of assignment. It seemed like there's still a lot of holes in that as well. I know there's been some training that's been happening. I also understand that a lot of those positions are revolving, and you might have new employees every 2 weeks at the Starbucks, at something like that. Where are we with sort of a constant training program?
I mean, the airlines in the aftermath of this, so United, for example, was the biggest airline that was impacted by this incident. They have been very helpful in not only encouraging us to put training on for them, but provide their own training and us supporting that particular training. So in that particular case, it's been a great relationship as far as that goes. Some airlines are very much into this. Delta, for example, has been doing a lot of work and a lot of training in that particular area. We do have smaller airlines and smaller groups at the airport that aren't necessarily tied together, but we're still working with all of them. I mentioned in my opening that we had put together training for SEIU, and we'd also put training for the stakeholders. Have we rolled that out to the majority of employees at the airport? And the answer to that question is no. But as a regular part of our cited badge process comes a series of training that people have to take as they are issued a badge. Our training starts there. That too is being enhanced with more training, but we still have a ways to go.
Could you estimate what percentage of badged employees have had the training in evacuation procedures?
Oh, I would probably less than 10%.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a lot of people in those evacuation procedures. Mm-hmm. At formal training by us on that since this incident. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that.
Or since November 1.
Since November 1, probably a little bit higher, but still not more than 25%.
Wow.
We are pushing that out. We mentioned the terminal floor warden program. Now, you talked about the whole airport approach. We're taking a whole terminal approach where we're going to get all the key players in the terminal, from the station manager, the airline manager, to the concessionaires, to the vendors, get them all, train them all as a whole, and utilize them, the service workers within wheelchair pushers, train them all in the evacuation procedures, the evacuation routes, so that if they are taking the proper evacuation routes that we want them to take, hopefully the crowds will follow them. We're start kicking that off in January, starting with the non-Delta involved terminals to once again to create that knowledge and to get everyone involved into that.
Should we be building into our concession contracts and our service contracts a requirement that people be trained periodically?
We do have a statement in our NELAs and our contracts that they have emergency preparedness training. We have not defined that. That could be something that we want to look at to define what emergency management training consists of. We do have online videos. We do have, as we say, the badge training. We train our employees at their orientation, but that is something we could look at.
The fire department does a really good job at the airport at ensuring that evacuation procedures are known. We test at the airport on a regular basis on evacuation procedures. So I don't want you to think that it's not something that's been done. Could we do more to enhance that? Because there is a difference. There's a difference between an evacuation that occurs with an earthquake or some other type of disaster versus what happens in an active shooter incident. So as long as we define that and can identify that and move that forward, I think there's always room for improvement along the way.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Colleagues, any additional questions? Comments on this? I know
one that will take 15 seconds. In addition to Mr. Bonin's request about comparing this after-action report with the recommendations of the previous 2014 after-action report, I think it would be also helpful to go back and look at the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Commission report on terrorism and security at the airport under the Villaraigosa administration. I'd actually like to know where we stand with those recommendations from so long ago in preparing the airport for potential threats and how that relates or was informed by this incident as well. So if we could get that status report as part of this report back as well, that would be, I think, instructive.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for that, and definitely ask for that. Any additional questions? No, we have one. Thank you very much for the report. It's comprehensive, and apologize. We have a lot on our agenda today. We do have a public comment card on this from Arnie Corlin. Mr. Corlin, if you could come up.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Arnie Corlin. Because I thought we had 2 minutes, I'm going to do what I had a 2-minute presentation in your packages.
We can do two. I usually do 2 minutes. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you. In your pack, you all have packages
Yeah.
for it anyways.
Go ahead. Give him 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Arnie Corlin. I'm a rental property owner in LAPD South Bureau, where I have put up over 130 cameras, which have been used in hundreds of crimes for LAPD, including 27 homicides. Well, the perception is that I've successfully installed lots of cameras. The reality is I understand how to layer my security as a process. I've been able to move cameras into position pre-incident for crimes on multiple occasions, including homicides. Additionally, I'm a volunteer for LAPD's Criminal Gang Homicide Division, where one of my assignments is to find and pull videos after incidents. More successfully, my assignment has been by identifying valuable, usable data using layering of security. December 12, 2010, I appeared before your predecessors at the Trade, Commerce, and Tourism Committee to express my concerns about the LAX Blue Ribbon study being seriously flawed. At that time, 2 committee members expressed interest in involving me in the panel. However, I believe they were told that I was not able to. At the end of 2013, I went through the Delta terminal, LAX. I was so concerned about the lack of layering and observed an individual bypass TSA uncontested. On September 7th, just 7 weeks prior to the incident, I emailed LAX Police Chief Gannon about my concern. With no response, I made multiple attempts all the way up. I was seriously concerned, and in your documentation is the verification of all the calls that I had made about the lack of layering. On August 3rd, 2015, a Special Olympics athlete went missing. In spite of the serious nature of the incident, I overheard a few Lawa PD personnel joking that he was probably just going to Dockweiler. If you look at that handout, that bulletin that I gave you, and a gang officer will look at that bulletin, and the subject went east into Inglewood, which he did, there would be significant reason to have an increased concern about that outcome. August 28, 2016, the topic of conversation today, listening to the radio traffic, the response was dysfunctional at best, respectfully, and again, lacking a layering of response of resources. October 17th, report of a man with a rifle near the LAX Hilton, more of the same. It's time to change your processes and procedures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, and certainly urge our public safety folks to heed that and as they move forward. So the recommendation on this item is to adopt the motion, which is basically to have a report, which we now have, but will move us forward along with the comments of Mr. Krikorian. Any questions on that, or can we move forward?
Just when they do their follow-up report that they were talking about,
Yeah.
which is, I guess, in April, I'd love to have that back so we can discuss it here.
Absolutely. So moved.
Yes, and this, Mr. Chair, will this include the comparisons to the Blue Ribbon report as well as the November 1st report that was submitted? Is that part of this amendment?
Okay. It was just suggested to me. We can continue the item. That way we can have the report back. And we can bring all of that back in the future. So without objection, that'll be the order. It's a good idea. Thank you, Sissy. Now, earlier I said we're going to go next to LAMP, but we have some time-limited items. I'd like to try to get those done quickly because we may lose quorum shortly, and then the LAMP report is a report that is not time-limited. So what's our next item that's time-limited item? Is it 10?
Yes, item number 10 does have a time limit.
Okay. And, colleagues and members of the public, I apologize. This is a longer meeting than expected. We had, because of the timings of the month and because of the holidays, we have a lot that's jammed into this one hearing. But we're trying to move as quickly as we can. So.
Councilman, I have a short video, but in the interest of time, if you want me to not show that, we'll just go right to the item.
How short is the video?
It's 4 minutes.
Why don't we go straight to the item?
Okay. All right. The item before you is basically it's What we are doing here is characterized as a change order, and I want to address that first of all because in the past we've had some issues with the terminology change order. What this is essentially exercising the construction option for a project that's being delivered under a design-build delivery system. So we entered into a contract with a joint venture of Turner PCL about a year and a half ago. We exercised the first phase of that contract, which was to complete the design and then come up with a guaranteed maximum price to construct the midfield satellite based on a target value that we developed as part of the project. Turner PCL and their designers have successfully completed the design, and we have successfully negotiated a guaranteed maximum price for the terminal. And what we are asking you to do today is approve the guaranteed maximum price, allowing us to exercise the construction option and move forward. Just to give you an idea of what we are doing here, the midfield satellite is the newest concourse that will be built at the airport. It will be primarily an international terminal. However, it will be able to be used for domestic arrivals and departures as well. We will be putting in 12 gates. The terminal is the first one that will be built at the airport that is not actually connected to the roadway. So it will be accessed primarily through a tunnel through the Tom Bradley International Terminal. Passengers will process through Tom Bradley and then go through a tunnel where they will then come up in the midfield satellite that is, as it shows there, is to the west of the Tom Bradley Terminal. There will be 12 gates, all of which will be international gates. The terminal will also include a immigration center for incoming passengers, and will also connect to the customs arrival at the Tom Bradley International Terminal. There is a change order associated with this, and that is what we're calling the baggage optimization program. We have had some capacity issues with the outbound international baggage system at the Tom Bradley International Terminal. As part of the modernization of the airport and as part of building this new international terminal, we have come up with an integrated solution to basically put in a completely new outbound baggage system. We will be one of the first airports in the United States utilizing what's called an individual carrier system that allows RFID tagging of each bag. It will increase the overall efficiency of the outbound baggage system to about 99% efficiency, reducing cost. So in order to get this done at the same time that we open up the new terminal, we have added that scope to the Turner PCL contract. So again, what we're asking you today is authorization of the guaranteed maximum price and execution of the construction option on the contract.
Right. And I know we're trying to move quickly, but it's important, some important issues here. Sure. It's a big increase, 35%, $355 million for a change order is eye-popping, and to some extent. And so the question that I have immediately, and I'm sure everyone comes to mind, is, why wasn't this part of the original scope? It seems that predictability, you mentioned there was capacity issues, but as I understand it, we haven't increased, as far as our capacity goes, the number of people, the estimates for the number of people haven't increased. So you would think that the baggage capacity would be linked to the number of people and should have been fairly predictable at the beginning of the scope. So help me understand why this wasn't part of the original scope and the very large increase, change order increase.
Well, first of all, a lot of the increase was actually due to some changes that were requested for us on the base scope of work. Some of those, as you can see on this here, I'll give you an example, the ramp control tower. When the project first came out of planning, we essentially had a ramp tower that was at the same level as the building, as the roof of the building itself. The FAA came back to us. They had done a study, and they came back and asked us if we would put in a full ramp control tower. So, for example, that was a regulatory requirement asking us to include the ramp control tower. Probably the most significant increase to the cost in a change order, and it came about as one of the benefits of using a design-build alternative. This terminal, what we're building right now, is the northern portion of what will ultimately be a much longer terminal that will extend to the south. As you can see on this drawing here, this box right here is actually the American Airlines Super Bay hangar that's currently being used as a maintenance hangar by American Airlines. When we first went into planning on this, the building actually ended farther to the north. What we were able to do through the design build, having the designer working collectively with the contractor, we were actually able to go out and find that we could add 2 additional gates to the project without impacting the operations of the American Airlines hangar. So while it is a change order, what we're actually doing is adding those gates now as opposed to waiting years from now when the American Airlines Super Bay hangar gets demolished, and it will actually be the cheapest gate addition that we can do at the airport because we'll do it at the same time that we're building this. So the bag system addition to this is actually about $163 million. It's not the total $300 million. So a lot of it was this additional work. One of the other changes to the base scope of work you can see here was a DWP substation. And this was something, as I've told you, this is the first terminal that we've built that's actually not connected to the central terminal area roadway. Every terminal that we've built, we've had a DWP substation in the basement of the terminal. As we were designing this terminal, DWP came back to us and asked us if we would take the terminal out of the center of the airfield and move it out to an area that was actually more accessible to them. So we've ended up moving the DWP substation out of the basement of the midfield terminal and moving it over to the west of the terminal along Coast Guard Road, where it will be easily accessible for maintenance in emergency operation. So again, that was one of the other changes that actually came out of the design process again. So the rest of the changes were the baggage system, and I will tell you, when we went out with this bag system, we were still working within the planning group on the development of an outbound international baggage system, and at that time that outbound system did not include integrating the MSC with the Tom Bradley terminal. As we worked with the international carriers, with our planning group, to come up with the best solution for an outbound baggage system, it was determined that the best way to do it was to come up with an integrated system that would feed both the midfield satellite as well as the Tom Bradley terminal. So basically what came up with is we're using this as a convenience. The other thing that I really want to emphasize is, while this is called a change order because of the contract type, this is not a change order like a typical change order you'd see on a contract. This work is all bid out, and it's actually new scope that's being added to this project that would essentially be no different than going out and doing it as an independent project. But because Turner PCL will be out there doing work, actually doing tunnels in the same area, staff recommended to our board that we do the work concurrently to ensure it's done at the same time. So I can assure you that all this work is being bid out, and again, it's called a change order, but that's more of an administrative term than what would typically be called a change order under a traditional design bid build contract.
Okay.
So.
One other topic, the small business enterprise goal. There's a 15% contract, has a mandatory 15% goal. Last time that we had Turner here at the table, we had a long discussion about their DBE goals, and we had a whole thing where they were 2% under one measurement and 14% under their measurement, but the requirement was 15%. So all that begs the question, how is LAWA going to enforce, and that one was not enforceable directly, but this one, I believe, is enforceable. So in a nutshell, how is this going to be enforced, and what are the teeth that go along with that?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. First of all, as you've indicated, because this is a small business goal, not an MBWBE goal, it is absolutely a contractual requirement, and failure to meet that contractual requirement is actually a breach of contract and has financial penalties associated with it. However, I will tell you, and there are officers from Turner PCL here today if you would like to talk to them. We have worked very closely with Turner PCL on this project, and there is a very robust local and small business outreach program going on. They've already significantly beat what their small business goal is right now on the engineering and design side of the house. In addition to that, one of the things that LAWA has done now within our planning and development group, we've created a new position. It's actually a monitoring and enforcement for our small business and our inclusivity goals. And that individual is monitoring all of the activities to make sure that somebody doesn't fall behind and we lose track of that. So we have substantially increased our monitoring and our enforcement of those goals. But the biggest change is the fact that it's now a contractual obligation that they have to meet or face penalties.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Bonner.
Thanks for the presentation, Roger. Do send me the video. I'd like to see it.
Okay.
Just a couple things. I think the changes are good ones. The baggage thing I think is smart. We'd have to be doing that later anyway. And the fact that you put in the additional concessions, I think, is wise. The passenger experience is a really big thing for me, and having the additional concessions there is good. And my understanding is we'll start seeing a return on that in about 6 years.
Yeah, actually, the return on our concessions in club space is closer to, I think, five to 6 years. So it's actually a very good investment.
Good. The other thing I just want to say is I like the wave design. I'm glad that's in there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, there's no any additional comments, colleagues? Seeing none, there are no public comments on this one. Is that correct?
No, Mr. Chair.
Great. Then I'd like to, without objection, move forward on this item. Item number 11. I think we could take that under consent if my colleagues are willing for item number 11.
Move the item?
Yeah.
Okay, so item 11 will be on consent. And there's no public comment cards on that one, correct?
No, Mr. Chair.
That brings us to item 12. Oh, we did 12, so 13. Mr. Bonner had a quick question on it, so we could have do you want a presentation, or would you like to just...
Don't need a presentation, just a quick question for Debbie. Thanks on this one. I know you're doing a lot of good work on this. Just more complicated than it sounds, because this is about cleaning up Manchester Square, which is land we're acquiring for the Conrack, but it's also complicated by the fact that it's got a skid row in the middle of it, and that's made it pretty complicated. So if you could just give me a quick sense, real quick, about the details about TCRE's responsibilities providing maintenance and cleanup on the LAWA-owned property.
Okay. So back when we did the First Amendment, we sort of separated this out. So there's a partnership between our facilities people and Total. So our facilities people in the middle where most of the encampments are try to clean up twice a week in order to do their landscaping and all the work they have to do. Total is responsible once a week to clean up the whole Manchester Square area. And then we're negotiating with the Bureau of Sanitation, the city's Bureau of Sanitation, to do monthly cleanups. So we are trying to address it and add some more cleanup opportunities.
Do you have the enforcement support you need from LAWA PD and from LAPD?
I think we do.
Okay.
And they're also aiding us on, besides doing enforcement of law, they're aiding us on just security issues and safety issues when we go out there.
Okay. Let us know if you need any help. I just really want to thank you personally and the airport for your work and your partnership with the Manchester Square Task Force and helping out with the sanitation issues. It's a huge help. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Without objection, this motion is adopted. Trustee Espinosa, that completes all the time-limited items, correct?
Yes, all we have is item number 8.
Item number 8. Okay, great. So I know Mr. Buscaino and Mr. Krikorian may need to leave at some point. So all of our necessary votes have been completed, and we'll move forward now with a presentation on the LAMP project. Great. Thank you very much.
And just to read this into the record, item number 8 is a motion from Council Members Bonin, Blumenfield, and Cedillo relative to the Los Angeles World Airports, providing an overview of the Los Angeles International Landside Access Modernization Program.
Okay. Good afternoon, Roger Johnson, again, Deputy Executive Director and LAMP Program Executive. In your motion, you asked us to give you an update that basically addressed 5 issues. I've addressed 4 of these individually in the last one I've put together. The first one is just a basic description of the major program elements of the LAMP program. LAMP stands for the Landside Access Modernization Program. And the intent of the LAMP is, as the acronym defines, is to improve the traffic and the ground access into and out of Los Angeles International Airport, and to help reduce the traffic impacts of local airport traffic around the communities around the airport. The LAMP program is comprised of 6 major elements. The centerpiece of the LAMP program is an automated people mover, and as this drawing shows here, the automated people mover actually starts essentially at the east, very close to the 405 freeway in the Manchester Square area, what is Manchester Square today, and then it runs approximately 2¼ miles on an elevated guideway that will run from the consolidated rental car facility all the way into the central terminal area, where it will terminate in what's called a west station directly in front of the Tom Bradley International Terminals between parking structures 3 and 4. The APM trains will run every 2 minutes. There will be 2-minute headways, so a customer will never have to wait more than 2 minutes for a train. And it will run, essentially, it'll be a 20-minute round trip. So it will be 10 minutes from the consolidated rental car facility to the west station in front of the Tom Bradley terminal, and then 10 minutes back. The trains will run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the trains will be free of charge. So there will be no costs associated with the trains. Right now, the trains are designed, the system is designed to carry 5,515 passengers per hour per direction. So essentially, about 11,000 passengers per hour will be able to use the train. So the train is being built for basically for a maximum capacity moving forward. The guideway is 100% elevated. It will run from about 50 feet to about 70 feet above ground, depending on the area where the train is running. The APM will be served by 6 stations. The easternmost station will be a station actually directly on the roof of the consolidated rental car facility, which I'll talk about in a minute, a little bit more in depth. But probably what's most important to note is right now almost about 18% of the passengers who arrive at LAX rent cars. So almost 18% of our destination passengers that come into LAX today rent vehicles. So simply by putting the ConRack, by the APM running to the ConRack, we will be driving 18% of the vehicle traffic off of the roadway. And that traffic, as some of you have seen, is the rental car shuttles that actually have a worse impact than a private vehicle. And just to put this in perspective, the most successful APM of an airport in the United States is JFK's SkyTrain. And approximately 20% of the passengers that arrive at JFK today arrive on the SkyTrain. So by having the Conrack there with about 18% of the passengers right now, LAX, the day the APM and the Conrack open, will come close to matching JFK's APM ridership. So we're very optimistic about the ability of this APM to reduce traffic impacts within the central terminal area.
18%?
18%, that's correct. It's a huge percentage of the arriving passengers. Yeah.
But currently, most of those passengers are getting on those little shuttle buses.
That's correct. Yeah.
So it's not 18% of the cars or the traffic, but
right.
18% of the people.
But actually, one shuttle, one of those rental car shuttles, actually has a bigger impact than I think about 20 personal vehicles.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's a significant impact.
Because they're slow and they stop.
They're slow, and when they stop, they stick out, and and they take up a huge curb space. So, yeah. So, whoops. The second station on this is actually, again, a very important one. It's called the Airport Metro Connector. And this is a station where we will connect with the Crenshaw line. So MTA right now, they recently got the funding and approved, I believe they improved the environmental, and they're in design. We're working very closely with Metro on the design of this, so that people will be able to access the airport APM from regional light rail. So it's a very important station. Coming farther down here, it will come into what's called the ITF West Station, and I'll talk about the ITFs, which are intermodal transportation facilities. But again, the intent there is to provide some alternatives for people who may not want to drive into the CTA. It's to provide an alternative to driving into the CTA. And then finally, the guideway will come down into the CTA, where there will be 3 stations in the CTA, an east station, a center station, and a west station. And those stations will then be connected to the terminals through elevated pedestrian walkways. There will be moving walks in the pedestrian bridges that we're calling them, that will connect to all of the terminals. So that's essentially the automated people mover system. The last element of this is something that is actually going to be built up in what is now called the Belfort Square area, which is a maintenance and storage facility, which is essential to the operation of the system. That will also be a 100% elevated system. That is where the train control system and the maintenance facilities for the APM will be housed. So I've already mentioned here the second element of the LAMP program is the consolidated rental car facility. LAX right now, as I've mentioned to you, about 18% of our passengers use rental cars. We are the second largest rental car market in the United States, behind Orlando. We have approximately 14,000 rental car transactions a day. Today, this facility is being built for 20,000 rental car transactions. But I also want to emphasize that those are the rental transactions. Those are not the amount of vehicles. That does not include the return vehicles or some of the transitioning of vehicles that go on at a rental car facility. Again, one of the most significant improvements that this consolidated rental car facility will do is it's going to take about 20 or more rental car companies that right now are spread out throughout the area and consolidate them into one area with better freeway access, closer freeway access, basically keeping people out of the neighborhoods again and providing a single point for people to rent vehicles. So, and it's kind of hard to see from here, but there are some significant roadway improvements that I'll get into in a couple minutes that essentially will help facilitate the use of this. We're improving the 405 off-ramp. We'll be improving a 105 off-ramp. We're actually doing some significant roadway work to improve access, including running 96th Street and 98th Street past Aviation. So we'll be significantly improving the roadway access. The third element is called the terminal elements. Those are the terminal cores. I've already mentioned the pedestrian bridges that will connect to the terminals. Those terminals will actually be elevated, so passengers will come off of the APM. They'll go across an elevated ped bridge into a terminal core where there will be new vertical conveyances, both escalators as well as elevators, to bring the passengers down to ticketing or all the way down to the ground level. One of the significant improvements in the intent of these terminal cores is today there are approximately 57 at-grade pedestrian crossings in the central terminal area today. So every time somebody parks, for example, in a parking garage, they go down to the ground level and they have to cross the street at grade. And when they do that, they stop traffic, which causes significant traffic congestion. All of those pedestrian crossings are going to be elevated, and they'll be crossing over using the pedestrian bridges in the terminal cores to the terminal. So our intent is to remove and eliminate all the pedestrian crossings. So in addition to the terminal cores, we will be adding new vertical transitions in the parking garages. So people parking in the parking garage, instead of going down to the surface and then crossing and stopping traffic, they will go up to the ped bridges and then cross over to the terminal cores and then go down into either meter greeter areas or if they're taking an aircraft. Again, I've already mentioned the metro component, which is MTA is building the airport metro connector. The ITFs are intermodal transportation facilities. I've mentioned ITF West. ITF West is the first one that will be built. At complete build-out, it will have approximately 7,600 parking spaces. But the ITFs will also have, hopefully, we're still working on this, but dining and concessions opportunities. Again, the idea here is to drive private vehicles and the shuttle traffic out of the central terminal area and provide an alternative for people who may want to come to the airport. So you can park here at the ITF and you can get on the APM and take the APM to your terminal. ITF East is over here. It's a little bit smaller. ITF East will be very similar. Again, it will be designed to accommodate shuttle and private vehicle traffic, as well as providing significant parking. You'll see in a minute when I get into the schedule that the ITF East right now is not planned to be built until the second phase of the LAMP program, which is after 2023. And then finally, the last element of the LAMP program is the roadways, and it's kind of difficult to see here, but any of the areas where you see significant large gray is new roadways and or improved roadways. So we have about $800 million in roadway improvements. That includes everything from new signalization. As I've indicated, we'll be running both 98th Street and 96th Street essentially across aviation. So up in this area as well as down in this area we'll be crossing. There will be a new road that will come in on 98th Street. We'll go from aviation under the Conrack that will connect all the way to a new off-ramp from the 405 freeway, providing better circulation into the consolidated rental car facility. Arborvitae will be significantly improved to the north as well to increase traffic and to reduce the traffic impacts. So again, those 6 items are the major elements of the Landside Access Modernization Program and what they're designed to improve. So the second question that you had asked was the LAMP procurement and the construction timelines, and this essentially shows where we are right now in the procurement process. Again, the APM, we have actually begun the procurement process, and I will get into where we are on that process. But as you can see, we plan on being in procurement through about the end of the first quarter of 2018. At which time we will issue a notice to proceed for construction, and we expect design and construction for that to go on until operationally we will be in operation no later than the second quarter of 2023. So the Conrack, very similar schedule. We have begun the procurement on the Conrack. Again, we plan that procurement started a little bit later than on the APM. And right now, we're showing basically having procurement finalized sometime around the first quarter of 2019. We do believe that the CONRAC can be built in less time than the APM. So we show the CONRAC being done. On this, I'm being conservative here, showing it being done at the same time as the APM. We do believe, based on our discussions with the construction community, that we should be able to actually improve the delivery on that and possibly have the CONRAC done before the APM is done, in which case it would be a busing operation until the APM is done. So the third is the terminal cores. We have begun the procurement also on the terminal cores, and I'll get into what those documents are again in a minute. The terminal cores are actually going to have to be done sooner than the APM, because the APM contractor is going to have to be able to connect the guideways, the stations, and the ped bridges into the terminal cores. And then we're going to need those done so that we can actually do the startup commissioning on the APN system. The ITF West, you can see here that we hope to begin procurement sometime after no later than that first quarter of next year. And we would like to finish procurement on that by 2018 and get the ITF West, at least the first portion of it, done no later than 2020. And one of the reasons for that is when we build the APM, we're going to have to demo at least 2 parking structures in the CTA because they are in the way of the APM alignment. And we would like to have new parking spaces available outside of the CTA before we demo parking structures 2A and 2B, so we can replace some of that park. Not only we won't lose parking revenue, but we need the parking spaces right now, so we hope to expedite that. So the other one is it's a procurement that's actually supporting all of LAMP, and this is something that we've gone out with a procurement right now for what we're calling Utilities and Enabling Projects contract. I'm sure some of you have seen the recent settlement on the 405 freeway on the MTA, which was a big design build job. That was a huge settlement on that, was related almost entirely to underground utilities and unknown utilities. We're going out with a very robust contract to not only identify but to also try and relocate as many of the major utilities as we can that may be in the way of the APM and the CONRAC contractors, so that we don't run into the same problems with unknown utilities. And then finally, the roadways. The roadways are actually going to be awarded, some of them as part of the APM contract, some as part of the CONRAC contract, and then a number of them will actually go out as independent contracts. So those roadway contracts in the procurement has already begun, but it'll go all the way through 2023 and actually through phase 2 of the APM. And then the ITF East, as I've already indicated, will not actually begin until after 2023. The third question that you'd asked for in your motion is what procurement documents have been released to date. For the automated people mover, the first thing that we did was released what we called the eligibility determination request. Now this is kind of a unique procurement for us. First of all, we are using what's called a design, build, finance, operate, and maintain, or a P3 contract for the APM. And under a DBFOM procurement, we actually get a proposal from a development team to not only design and build, but to actually provide some of the financing and then operate and maintain the APM for a 25-year period. We're actually procuring that under 2 steps. And the first step was to go out and ask APM operating system suppliers that were interested in providing a system to LAWA as part of a development team to submit an application to us demonstrating that their system could actually meet our performance criteria. Under a typical procurement like this, the development community would put a team together and we would be evaluating the fixed facility teams as well as the operating systems. Because this is such a critical facility, as I've indicated, the day we open, with the Conrack traffic and then with the ITF facilities that we'll have, and then the Metro connector, we're hoping to have somewhere in excess of 20% of the passengers accessing LAX use the APM. That will make it a critical facility from day one. So we want to make sure that the operating system providers that are proposing or are being proposed as part of the development team have systems that can absolutely not only meet our performance criteria, but that they're reliable and the operating system providers have the financial wherewithal and the proven history to be able to provide the system. So we have, we issued what was called the eligibility determination request process. We've received 6 applications. We've essentially certified 4, and we're still reviewing 2 of those. So the second procurement that went out was a request for qualifications for the APM fixed facility providers. We received 5 statement of qualifications from 5 world-class teams. And we've actually shortlisted all of the teams moving forward. So the Conrack, actually, just the request for qualifications for the Conrack was just released. For the terminal cores, a request for qualification was released. For 2 of the cores, the Tom Bradley core and a core at Terminal 5.5, that will be a design-build contract, and I'll mention in a couple more minutes how the other terminal cores are planning on being delivered. The utilities and enabling projects, we actually released a request for proposals, and that again will actually be a hybrid design build and construction manager at risk procurement. So moving forward on the procurement documents that will be released, we plan on releasing the final RFP for the integrated APM system, so that'll include both the operating system as well as the fixed facilities in June of 2017. Again, that will be a design, build, finance, operate, and maintain contract. We are hoping to release the final DBFOM contract for the Conrack no later than February 2018. And some of these dates may change. I can tell you the June 27 date for June 2017 for the Conrack or the APM is pretty firm. If we can advance the Conrack one closer than that, we would like to do that. The final design build RFP for the terminal cores for Tom Bradley and Terminal 5.4, what we're calling 5.5, we hope to get out around March of 2017. The rest of the terminal cores are actually going to be delivered by the tenants. For example, Southwest will be building the terminal core in what we call 1.5 as part of the terminal 1.5. Delta will be building the cores for terminals 2 and 3 in their agreement. So those agreements will actually be going out and they'll be coming to you as part of the tenant work. The ITF West, again, a design build RFP. I'd like to be able to get that out no later than the second quarter of next year, again, because we want to try and get that done. And then the roadways, again, those are going to go out with various requests for bids and or requests for proposals. The last 2 questions that you had asked is what approvals are needed and what kind of leadership and support can we get from the council. So I've tried to break these out into essentially 4 primary areas that we're looking, and number 1 is just the contract approvals. I mean, we will be bringing to you a number of contracts, the automated people mover, DBFOM, and you know, the capital cost for the fixed facilities along with the operating system is about $2.2 billion. On top of that, we will have 25 years of operation and maintenance plus finance charges. So I want to emphasize that we probably need to be doing a lot of talking early on because that will be a multi-billions of dollars agreement between LAWA and the developer. So it will be It will certainly be the largest contract I think this city's ever seen. So when it comes to leadership and support, we're going to have to be working pretty closely together as we get closer to that contract being awarded. The Conrac DBFOM contract, very similar. The capital cost for that is around $1 billion. And we will have, again, 25 years of O&M on that, plus the financing charges. So the other contracts are the Intermodal Transportation Facility Design Build, the Utilities and Enabling contracts, the Terminal Cores Design Build contract, and then, as I mentioned, the Terminal Core tenant agreements that will be part of some of the larger tenant agreements that come to you. There will be a number of land use and environmental approvals. We hope to come to City Council in the middle of next year with the CEQA approvals, but we will also need some amendments. We'll need the LAX plan amendment, a specific plan amendment. The Westchester Playa del Rey Community Plan will need to be amended, and the Mobility Plan 2035. All of those amendments are going to happen, and there's opportunities there, I think, to work both with this committee and the Planning and Land Use Committee, for example, for the possibility of some joint land use or some joint committee meetings that might help expedite some of the approval process for the environmental and land use approvals. We have a number of third-party agreements we're working on. I should say that I've already experienced through some of the leadership in the mayor's office and working with Deputy Mayor Ray Chan. We are working right now on a master memorandum of understanding with all of the city agencies. That's going great. I mean, you know, the port mentioned to you, for example, the help they're going to need with their clean air program from DWP. This is going to be an electric train. We are going to have significant electrical increases to our electrical loading. We have at least 3 traction power stations, possibly 4, that we're going to have to be putting in, and we've been working very closely with DWP. We have similar issues to the port, both with power capacity, but also with power reliability. A lot of these systems that we're running are very sensitive systems. So not only do we need sufficient quantity of power, we need a very clean quality of power. And we need to work very closely with DWP to make sure the infrastructure is in place so that we have not only the quality and the quantity, but redundancy, so that if power does go down, we have backup power supplies, whatnot on this. We certainly could use some leadership from the council on some of that going on with DWP. We're working on a master cooperative agreement with MTA. And again, having some joint membership between the council and MTA. And Councilman Bond and you and your staff have already provided some great assistance and support on that, and we appreciate it. We're also working on a master cooperative agreement with Caltrans for some of the work that we'll be doing on the 105, on the 405. We also have to cross Sepulveda, which is a state highway and subject to Caltrans approval, so we're working on those agreements. And then last, we still have some significant property acquisition, and some of that may require condemnations. Those condemnation actions will have to come before the council for support on that. So that is basically a summary of where we are on the LAMP program right now, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Great, appreciate it, and good thorough report. Looking at this last page about the environmental approvals makes me think about the EIR. We did the draft EIR. When is the final EIR? When do we expect that to be completed?
We hope to have the final EIR out and circulated, I believe, around June is when we're looking to get it back. So it'll be done this spring. We're working on, the comment period is closed. We didn't get that many comments. I think we got about 60 comments on that. So we're working on those comments right now. So I believe we'll be coming to the council for certification sometime around June on the EIR.
By the way, just because it's been 3 hours in this hearing, we may not seem overly excited, but this is really exciting stuff. And I know certainly the two of us and the council are all the things that you mentioned that you need the council action. We're fully committed to and excited about making happen. So
I appreciate.
Don't interpret our grogginess
It's been
at
a
the
long
end of the day, especially because I'm trying to move things quickly because we both have other stuff
Yeah.
coming up. One other area I just wanted to ask about, we had a big push to get LAWA small business and local business enterprise ordinance approved ahead of the procurement activities for LAMP. Now that the ordinance is in effect, tell us a little bit how it's been incorporated into LAMP and how that's working.
Well, first of all, the way it's been incorporated is all of the LAMP procurement documents now have the local small business and local small business requirements embedded in the document. So the ordinance has helped us actually make that now part of the contractual requirements. So again, every contract that is awarded under the LAMP program will have local and local small business mandatory requirements. So that's how the ordinance has helped. Beyond that, we have begun a number of outreach events where we're the local small business community has been very open to us about the lack of resources that they have to respond to the multiple number of outreach events that the contractors are having on these for these procurements. So what we're trying to do right now is put together some outreach events that LAWA is sponsoring, where rather than having all of the major contractors do independent events, we're basically telling all the major contractors come to us, and we're doing what actually someone on my staff called speed dating, where we're having the small businesses come and have all of the primes interested in participating and work to introduce each other. We've also made inclusivity one of the scoring criteria on all of the LAMP contracts that we're going out with. So it's beyond just we want you to do this. We've actually made it a scoring and a selection criteria, basically trying to demonstrate our commitment to it. And I would say in addition to that, we're working on a very robust workforce development program, working with some of the local agencies. Again, because there will be 25 years of operation and maintenance on this, there are opportunities for contracts and for trades for people who live within the impact area of LAX for some really good paying jobs, some skilled trade jobs. And we'd like to make sure that the people that essentially have the most significant impacts from the airport operations would also have the opportunity to benefit from this type of program. So in addition to the local small business, we're putting together a very robust workforce development program as well.
That's great. Mr. Vaughn.
Just one question. Now that voters have approved Measure M, I know you're busy with this, but are you giving any thought to where the station is going to be so Mr. Blumenfield can take the train from the Valley down to LAX?
We're meeting with MTA on that on a weekly basis.
I like the question. Because that's a great goal. Great. Thank you for the report. Very much appreciate it. It's a great update and a great project.
And appreciate your support on this. Really do. It is an exciting project.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I don't know that we need to take, we can note and file it as far as having two members here. Is any formal action that we need to take? I don't think so.
We can note and file or approve the motion, but it will be a communication from the chair and member.
Okay, so be it. So we can approve the motion as a communication. And no additional public comment cards, no general public comment cards, correct? Anything else?
No, Mr. Chair.
On the docket? Then with that, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.